My girlfriend let go of my hand in front of the entire guild hall and took the heirs instead. I didn't chase her. I knelt beside Soot, the ashscale lizard everyone called trash, and checked his cracked collar strap. Karst nodded once at Roderick and Kaiser, gold light blazing off the Sunmane lion, and the crowd roared. I pulled 4 cracked monster crystals from my coat, veined gray, rejects nobody else wanted. I closed my hand around them and let pet food strip the rot away. Green light flared between my fingers, a jagged plus LEVL mark burning where the rot had been. I smirked. Past the rafters, a silhouette flickered through the projection screens, the same scales, grown vast, a beast of scale and starlight, rank-locked at SSS+. Karst's registrar read the verdict flat. 72 hours. Register Soot, unlock all 7 crown marks, or lose him to the shelter cages for good. I looked down at Soot. The clock had already started. The awakening hall thinned out fast once the crowd had its show. Soot's tail stayed curled tight around my boot, and he didn't flinch when the noise died. A registrar in a gilt-gray coat waved me toward the counter. She held my examination tablet flat against her chest, then turned it around. My name sat at the top of the beast theory and handling rankings. First place. Above Roderick's score. Above the score that used to carry Nina's name beside mine, before she transferred our paired registration 2 days early and left my half standing alone. You scored highest in the hall, she said. It changes nothing tonight. She tapped her clipboard with one finger, not looking up. No sponsor, no gate access, no gate access, no trial slot, and in 72 hours the registration office strips him and files him unlicensed. She finally met my eyes. Your lizard goes to a shelter cage. That's the rule, not my opinion. I understand, I said. I didn't move toward the exit. Across the hall, Talia knelt beside Roderick's Sunmane lion, running a diagnostic wand along his mane. Kaiser stood taller than a warhorse, gold light rolling off him in slow waves. Talia clicked her tongue, glanced at Soot, then back at Kaiser. The lion had gone rigid, nose leveled at Soot, ears flat, feet planted like the floor had cracked open under him. Roderick pulled Kaiser's lead short, jaw tight. He's a lizard, not a threat. Sit. Kaiser didn't sit. He backed a full step instead, mane bristling, and a low sound rolled out of his chest that wasn't a growl and wasn't a purr. Roderick looked at me across the hall like I'd rigged the floor against him. He won't come near your lizard, Talia said. Royal Line lions don't spook. I didn't have an answer for that. I had a crystal instead. I pulled the cracked shard from my coat, one of the 4 I'd carried out of tonight's wreckage. Its surface had gone dull gray, veined with hairline fractures where the mana inside had curdled and soured. I closed my hand around it and let pet food sort the damage the way a hand sorts grain from chaff. Rot fell away between my fingers as gray dust. What remained brightened layer by layer into a clean gem, the color of morning light, one green mark pulsing across its face, plus LEVL. I set it on the floor in front of Soot. I didn't push it toward him. I didn't give him an order. He sniffed it once, twice, then closed his jaw around it and swallowed. His scales rippled. A thin gold-gray light traced down his spine and vanished before I could name the color. He shuddered, once, hard, like a shiver running the wrong direction, then went still. His head came up. His eyes found mine and held there, steadier than they'd been all night, and for a second, neither of us moved. Somewhere behind me, a voice in the thinning crowd said, "Lo, did you see that?" And another voice shushed it. I opened the beast ledger with a thought and watched the numbers climb. Combat 8,016, Bloodline 3%, both locked in green. Talia crossed the hall in 4 strides and swept her scanner across Soot's chest, then his jaw, then down each foreleg. She checked the reading twice, frowned, and ran the wand a 3rd time along his spine where the light had traced through. The display blinked, steadied, then blinked again, numbers refusing to settle on one line. Kaiser still hadn't moved from his stance behind her. "This isn't a stat buff," she said. His tissue density changed. Bone, scale, channel width, all of it. Physical, permanent. She looked up at me. "I've scanned prize stock that didn't grow like this in a season." The registrar's pen had stopped moving over her clipboard. I looked down at Soot. He looked back up at me, already steadier on his feet, like those 8 extra points had settled into his legs before they'd settled anywhere else. The ledger flickered again, unasked, and a new line unrolled beneath the numbers. FANG mark, 03 ingredients. Condition, chosen defense 3 ingredients. A door, not an answer. It could wait. Talia was already firing questions I didn't have time to answer. Above the exit doors, the hall's countdown board slid down another notch while everyone in the room stared at my lizard instead of the clock. 71,022. Talia pressed a brass key into my palm while the crowd still pressed toward the counter behind us. "One night," she said. "The discard ward. Nobody official will look for you there." I closed my fingers around the key and walked, Soot's small feet clicking on the stone beside mine. The ward smelled like wet fur and old bandages. Cages lined both walls, stacked 3 high, each one holding something the city had decided wasn't worth keeping. A wing-clipped hawk, a 3-legged badger cub, creatures nobody had bothered to name on their intake tags. A wind fox pressed her nose against the bars of the nearest cage. Her breathing rasped through a nostril that wouldn't fully open. "Nix," Talia said, checking a clipboard. "Collapsed scent channels since birth. No buyer wants a tracker who can't smell." Past her, a tortoise the size of a serving platter sat motionless under a heat lamp. A jagged crack ran across his shell like a dry riverbed. "Bramble," Talia said. "Shell fractured in a cave-in. He hasn't grown a millimeter of new plate in 2 years." Soot climbed into an empty cage and curled against the bars, watching both of them with his dark, patient eyes. Courier knocked on the ward door and slid a sealed notice under it without waiting for an answer. I picked it up. The wax seal showed a crowned gate, Karst Guild. I read it out loud so Talia could hear. "By registration of the Awakening Hall, any newly discovered ancient bloodline is the property of the guild that certified the awakening." I set the paper down on the counter. "They're already writing rules for a bloodline they haven't even confirmed." "They confirmed enough," Talia said. "Roderick's been telling everyone at the guild hall what Soot's scan looked like." I crumpled the notice in my fist. "So the guild sends a courier before they even send a scanner. That's not paperwork. That's a claim." "It's a threat with a wax seal," Talia said. She took the crumpled paper from my hand and smoothed it flat against the counter, reading it again herself. "This clause only holds if the guild certifies the awakening first. If nobody from Karst has laid eyes on Soot mid-change, they've got nothing but rumor. Roderick doesn't need a certified scan, he just needs people scared enough to believe him. Then don't hand him more to talk about." Talia folded the notice into a small square and dropped it into a drawer under the counter. "Whatever you do in this ward stays in this ward until you decide otherwise." I still had 1 purified crystal left in my pocket, the twin of the one Soot had eaten hours earlier. I'd told myself I was saving it for him. I looked at Nix pawing at her cage door, then at Soot, who wasn't asking for anything. I knelt in front of Nix's cage and opened the latch. She flinched back, then crept forward when I set the crystal on my open palm instead of forcing it toward her mouth. She sniffed it with the nostril that worked, hesitated, and ate it from my hand. Her whole body went rigid. Her ruined nostril flared, then flared again, wider than before. She sneezed hard enough to knock herself sideways, shook out her fur, and lifted her head like she was smelling the ward for the first time. Talia's scanner beeped. She turned the screen toward me. "Scent channel 12%, 21%. "That's not a fluke," she said. "That's structural. You just repaired damaged tissue on a beast that isn't even yours." I picked the empty crystal shell up off the floor and turned it in my fingers, the way Hob would a moment later. "Do it again," I said to Talia. "Scan her twice more. I want to know this wasn't luck." Talia ran the scanner over Nix a second time, then a third. Both readings held at 21%. "It's not luck," she said. "It's repeatable." An old man stepped out from behind the supply shelves, apron stained with 100 old recipes, hands scarred from decades of knife work. He'd been watching from the shadows the whole time. He picked up the empty crystal shell Nix had left on the floor and turned it over in the lamplight. "This wasn't enchanted," he said. "Enchantment leaves a residue. This was rebuilt from the inside, purified." He looked up at me. "I haven't seen that done since before the first gate catastrophe. My name's Hob. I used to cook for beasts nobody else would touch." "Then you know what I need," I said. "Soot's got a mark waiting on him. Fang mark. I need moonhorn crystal dust and ironroot salt, and I need a condition met that I don't fully understand yet." Hob set the crystal shell down. "I'll teach you the recipe, but I won't hand you the ingredients, and I won't let you buy your way past this with someone else's coin." His eyes moved to the sealed Karst notice still sitting on the counter. "Get the first ingredient yourself. No guild access. No spending Roderick's money to spite him. If pet food is what I think it doesn't answer to purchase orders." Nix pressed her healed nostril against my hand and huffed, testing a new scent she'd never had access to before. Bramble's crack didn't close, didn't even shrink, but his eyes tracked me for the first time since I'd walked in. He pulled his head back into his shell an inch, then pushed it back out like he was deciding whether I was worth the effort of watching. Talia crouched beside his heat lamp and rested 2 fingers against the crack. He's given up on new plate for 2 years, she said. That's the first time I've seen him track anything that wasn't food. Soot rose from the cage floor and stood beside me, waiting to see what I'd do with an ingredient I didn't yet have. The ward's wall clock ticked past the hour. Talia's scanner still showed the countdown running underneath Nix's readout, red digits sliding down toward the trial deadline. 69 nows and 30 thous. I read Hobbs' slate before the sun was up. Fong meal needed 2 things: moonhorn crystal dust and ironroot salt. I counted my coins and walked to the market gate. Frost still coated the stall awnings. A crier's board listed the moonhorn stock as sold, 1 buyer, 1 lot. I asked the crier who bought it. He said Roderick Stewart had cleared every clean vial before sunrise. I didn't argue with the board. I walked the butcher row instead. Discarded horn sheaths sat piled behind one stall, cracked and gray, headed for the tanners. I picked one up and turned it toward the light. Dust inside it caught the same faint blue shimmer as the moonhorn vials on the crier's list, just dimmer. The same note played quieter. Lower density, same signature. Pet food didn't care which container the manna came in. A horn blared across the square before I could bag it. A cargo beast, a scaled draft ox twice my height, had snapped its lead and was slamming through stacked crates. 2 guild-trained tamers moved in with rope and raised voices. The ox reared. Crates split. A child screamed near the wheel ruts. I dropped the horn sheath and ran toward the ox instead of away from it. I pulled a strip of dried meat from my belt pouch and crouched low, holding it flat instead of raised. The tamers kept shouting commands, and the ox kept swinging its head at the noise. I stayed quiet. I let the scent reach it first. The ox's nostrils flared toward my hand. Its front legs stopped churning. I said one soft word, the same tone Soot answered to, and the ox lowered its head into the meat. The square went still. The tamers lowered their rope, confused that quiet had worked where shouting hadn't. The butcher who owned the stall pushed through the crowd and caught my shoulder before I could stand. He said I'd saved his whole delivery contract. He pressed the cracked horn sheath into one of my hands and a wrapped block of ironroot salt into the other. No charge, he said. Then he told me to get out before the wardens asked why an unlicensed handler was calming beasts in the open square. I found Hob at his stall an hour later and laid both ingredients on his counter. He turned the horn sheath over once, then held it to his nose instead of reading it. Forget the ledger's long menu, he said. You don't need a page of numbers to know what feeds a beast. Texture tells you density. Smell tells you what it fought last. Heat tells you if the mana's still alive in there. Show me, I said. He turned the horn sheath so the cracked edge faced up and set it in my palm. Run your thumb along the grain first. Slow. I dragged my thumb across it. The surface wasn't smooth like bone. It caught in ridges, fine as sand, packed hard, denser near the base than near the tip. It's rougher at the bottom. That's where the density sits, Hobbs said. Dense mana, dense feel. A thin vial from a clean market stall would run smooth the whole length. Nothing to catch on. That's why Roderick Stewart buys smooth. He tapped the block of ironroot salt next. Now smell it. Don't sniff politely. Get your nose to the crack. I brought the salt up and breathed in hard. Iron first, sharp and metallic. Then underneath it something sourer. Old sweat, old fear. It smells like something that was scared. Ironroot only sours like that when the beast fought before it died. That sour note means more mana got packed into the salt during the fight than a whole season of grazing ever could. He set the salt down and picked the horn sheath back up, held it under my nose. This one, I breathed it in. No sour note, just a faint green smell, like cut grass gone old. Nothing scared, just tired. Old age, not a fight. Different food, same shelf. He pressed my palm flat against the sheath. It was warm, warmer than dead stone should be. Last test. Heat. I held my palm against the crack and waited. The warmth didn't fade the way it should have on a dead scrap behind a butcher's stall for a full night. It pulsed once, faint, like something breathing slow under the crack. It's still warm. It shouldn't be. That warmth is why Roderick's clean vials won't matter. A sealed vial goes cold in an hour. This sheath's been out since before dawn, and it's still breathing heat into your hand. Alive is the food, not fresh. I ground the salt and horn dust together until the mixture felt ready under my thumb, so it sat on the counter's edge, patient, watching 2 ordinary feed crystals glow in a dish beside my hands. I nudged the dish toward him. Soot ate both crystals without hesitation, one after the other, crunching through the shells like they were nothing. The ledger lit above his shoulder. Combat 1645. Hobbs set down his knife and looked at the number twice. That's the fastest gain I've seen on a first week beast, he said. I looked back at the meal still forming under my hands. Moonhorn dust, 1 measure. Iron root salt, 1 measure. The third slot still empty. Green text updated beside Soot's new combat score. Fang meal ingredients 2-3. Final requirement. Condition chosen defense. I pocketed the mixture and started back toward the discard ward, Soot trotting at my heel, the missing third piece still an open question. 66 Naf Mahler. We were still 2 streets from the ward gate when the alarm cracked over it. Before I'd even finished plating the meal, iron split somewhere close, then stone. A tusked beast in leaking bronze armor shouldered through the perimeter fence and into the street, headplate low, tusks scraping sparks off the cobbles. Cages rattled up and down the row. I grabbed the prepared crystals off the bench and ran for the ward door. The Emberbird's cage sat nearest the fence line, wire bent soft from years of storms, latch rusted shut. She threw herself against the bars, wings smoking, and couldn't clear the gap. The tusked beast's next stride would put its shoulder straight through the mesh. I hit the door release. Soot stood in the frame, no bigger than a house cat, watching the tusked beast's armor plates flex with every breath it took. I didn't point at the beast. I didn't give the hold command Hob had drilled into me all morning. I let the leash line drop and stepped back out of his way. Soot walked past me on his own and stopped between the tusked beast and the cage. Not behind the fight, inside it. His tail lay flat against the cobbles. He didn't growl. He just planted himself between the fire and the thing that wanted to burn it and refused to move for anyone. The tusked beast lowered its head and charged. Light flared blue across my wrist. Fang meal. Condition met. Chosen defense. 3 days, the clue had waited for exactly this, and it hadn't been a command that finished it. It had been Soot's own choice. I'd carried the 3 ingredients ready since the market. Moonhorn dust, iron root salt, the ash-cooled shard Hob had set aside that morning. Petfruit folded them into one meal while the tusked beast closed the last 5 yards, and I didn't stop to admire the light. I threw the crystal underhand. Soot caught it in his jaws and swallowed it whole, half a stride before the impact landed. The tusks hit the cobbles where Soot had been standing a heartbeat earlier because Soot wasn't there anymore. He was already changing. His frame stretched a full body length taller between one breath and the next. Silver scales climbed his spine and locked over his ribs plate by plate, each one catching the street lamps like struck coin. His snout lengthened into a blunt wedge. Claws punched out through his front paws and bit into the cobblestone for grip. Wings he hadn't owned an hour ago snapped open and threw the tusked beast's second charge sideways into a fence post. The post cracked in half and dropped a curtain of splinters over the empty lot. Talia's scanner beeped so fast it blurred into one tone. F to D, she called out, reading her own wrist without looking up. Combat 45 to 800. Bloodline 4% to 14. She lowered the scanner an inch and stared at the readout again like she didn't trust it the first time. Then she looked at Soot, then at me, and her voice dropped. 0 of 7 crown marks to 1 of 7. A vein of pale gold ran up through the silver scale on Soot's shoulder where there had only been plain scale of breath before, bloodline showing through his skin like a crack filling with light. Soot didn't wait for the tusked beast to recover. He drove one shoulder into its flank and walked it backward on the new weight, away from the cages, away from the fence, into the open lot where the loose crates couldn't hurt anyone. Cobbles tore loose under his claws with every push. The tusked beast dug its hooves in and screamed through its tusks, bronze plates grinding against silver scale, and still it lost ground a foot at a time. It swung its head low, tusk aimed for the softer meat behind Soot's shoulder. Soot caught the strike on a foreleg plated in silver and didn't flinch. Sparks jumped off the impact and died hissing on the wet stone. The tusk beast tried a second angle, driving its skull sideways into Soot's ribs, and this time Soot rode the hit instead of blocking it, letting his new weight absorb the shove so the blow spent itself against scale instead of bone. He planted both hind legs and shoved back before the tusk beast could reset its stance. Its front hooves skidded, found no purchase, skidded again. Soot answered with his own head, driving the blunt wedge of his skull into the tusk beast's jaw, and the crack of it carried over the whole ward. The tusk beast staggered sideways into a stack of empty crates and knocked them flat, dust rolling up off the boards. It came back once more, slower, one foreleg dragging, and Soot met it head on and didn't give an inch. 3 more strides and the tusk beast's legs folded under it, wind gone, armor cracked, and not one ward animal so much as scratched. Hob reached the fence line with flour still dusting his hands and said nothing for a long moment. 2 city guards who'd come running with spears leveled just lowered them and stared. Behind them, the whole row of shops had emptied onto the street, phones already out. Nobody moved closer than the fence line. Nobody had to be told why. Talia knelt at the Emberbird's cage and worked the rusted latch free with her belt knife. The bird stumbled out, singed but whole, and pressed herself against Soot's new foreleg like she'd known him longer than an hour. That's not a stimulant twitch, Hob said, mostly to himself, running a thumb along one of Soot's new scales without touching it. That's structure. Bone, scale, channel, all of it built new, not borrowed. He looked at me. You fed him mid-fight. Most tamers wait for the beast to be safe first. He wasn't going to be safe first, I said. He chose the fight before I ever opened that door. The tusk beast lay still in the lot, breathing but beaten, and the guards moved in to net it for transport back through the leak point. Talia's scanner spat out a final confirmation strip and handed it to me without a word. I looked down at the countdown stitched into the corner of my own ledger display, the number that never stopped moving no matter what Soot became, 60,010. I put my hand flat against Soot's flank before the seizure order finished unrolling. A city chit clipped to my belt buzzed once and threw a number against my palm, 63,010, counting down from the same clock that had started at the Awakening Hall. Roderick strode through the guard line with Kaiser pacing at his heel, the lion's mane catching the street lamps like poured gold. 2 enforcers flanked him, capture rods already humming. "Stand him down," Roderick said. He held the parchment up so the crowd could read the seal. That thing didn't evolve. It's running on an unstable stimulant effect, and I want it scanned before it hurts someone. I didn't move. Talia stepped between us with her scanner already lit. "Then let's scan it," she said. She pressed the flat disc against Soot's new scales. The readout climbed her forearm in cold blue light. She read it out loud so nobody could claim she'd hidden anything. New organs seated behind the ribs, new scales fused root deep into the hide, new mana channels branching where none had existed that morning. Not overlaid, not borrowed, grown. The crowd went quiet in the specific way. A crowd goes quiet when a rumor just died in public. Roderick's jaw worked. He looked at Kaiser like the lion could argue for him. Kaiser didn't. The Sunmane lion walked forward on his own, past Roderick's outstretched hand, past the enforcers, until his muzzle hovered an inch from Soot's snout. His nostrils flared, once, twice. Something in his golden eyes changed, the way a soldier's face changes when he recognizes rank. Kaiser lowered his head to the pavement. I heard Roderick say his name. Kaiser didn't lift his head. The same beast Roderick paraded through guild halls as a trophy was bowing to the lizard his own guild had thrown in a gutter 3 days ago. Nobody in that crowd needed the scan report anymore. They had the lion. Talia lowered her scanner. "Permanent," she said, mostly to the trial officials crowding the barricade. "Witnessed, city recorded, permanent." An older man in a board sash pushed forward before Roderick could recover his voice. He introduced himself as an independent trial adjudicator and said his board could not ignore a permanent D-rank evolution performed in front of city officials, guards, and half the discard ward. He said it like a man reading a rule off a card he'd never expected to need. I got a provisional independent trial slot on the spot. No sponsor line, no guild seal. Just a stamped chit pressed into my palm while Roderick's seizure order sat forgotten in his fist. Talia leaned in to read the chit over my shoulder before I'd even closed my hand around it. "1 of 7, she said. "That's what the board's going to see when they pull your file. 1 mark of 7, and you're already standing in front of an adjudicator." She said it flat, not proud, just counting. The adjudicator wasn't finished. He read the trial terms off the same card, slow enough that the crowd behind the barricade could hear every word. The trial closed the moment the countdown reached 0. Pass it, and Soot's registration stood on its own. City recorded, no guild able to touch it. Fail it, and Soot would be seized as an unlicensed asset on the spot, and my tamer path ended with him. He rolled the parchment and handed it to a guard runner to log, and the runner took off down the street at a jog like the number on my chit mattered to him too. Master Hob pushed through from the back of the crowd, apron still dusted with feed meal, and planted himself at the edge of the barricade where I could see him. He didn't say anything. He just nodded once, the way he did when a dish came out right, and that was worth more than half the words spoken in that street. The 2 city guards who'd been posted at the barricade all evening lowered their capture rods for the first time since the seizure order went up. One of them said something to the other I couldn't hear, and they both looked at Kaiser still bowed on the pavement instead of at me. Somewhere behind the barricade, a woman was already telling the story to the people who hadn't seen it, pointing at Soot, then at the lion, then at Roderick's back. By morning, it would be a different story than the one that had gotten Soot thrown in a gutter 3 days ago, and I didn't need to say a word to make that happen. The street had done it for me. Roderick finally found words. "This changes nothing. A discard ward mutt with 1 lucky feeding doesn't beat a bloodline." "Then don't lose," I said. He turned and walked Kaiser away without another word. Kaiser went, but he looked back once, towards Soot, before the crowd swallowed them both. The enforcers fell in behind Roderick without the capture rods raised, and the barricade guards let the whole procession pass without a word, watching until they turned the corner out of the district. Talia crouched by Soot's new foreleg, checking a scale seam with her thumb. "You've got a shot now, a real one. Don't waste it arguing with him." I wasn't planning to. The beast ledger opened over Soot's collar on its own, the way it did when a stage closed and the next one loaded. Green text stacked itself in the dark: scale mark, molt head, ironback plate, gray gate, no quantity yet, no condition yet. Just a target and a place to find it. Same as the fang mark had started, with nothing but a shape to chase. Soot pressed his new snout against my wrist, scales still warm from the scan light. I scratched under his jaw and let myself have exactly one breath of relief before the next problem crowded in behind it. The trial chit in my other hand had a countdown stamped into its corner, ticking down from the same clock that had been running since the awakening hall. It read 60 ost. 0 meant seizure. 0 meant Soot in a karst transport crate and me with no beast, no sponsor, and no path. 60 hours to build a lizard from D rank to whatever the trial board expected of a champion, starting with a plate that had to be shed, not stolen, from something that could kill me for asking. I looked down the street toward the Gray Gate district and started walking. The independent trial grounds gate rolled open on a ring of packed white sand, the Gray Gate district still a promise for later. I walked Soot to the starting chalk line and knelt beside him. A proctor's voice boomed through the stands. This round measured precision, not rank. I nodded. Soot's tail flicked once against the sand. The first 3 candidates went in loud. A boulder crab the size of a cart smashed straight through a training barrier instead of stopping at the marker. A horned mastiff overshot its target zone and skidded into the judge's rope. Each miss cost points on the board above us. I watched the numbers fall and kept my hands loose at my sides. A third handler, a girl with a spotted wolf on a short lead, flinched at a horn blast and let her wolf lunge 2 strides past the marked line. The board docked her 10 points for the overrun. When our turn came, I raised one finger. Soot froze mid-stride. I turned my palm flat. He dropped low, claws spread, chest an inch off the ground. I closed my fist. He stopped breathing hard and went still as stone at the exact edge of the marked circle. The crowd went quiet for a second, then clapped. Soot had crossed the barrier line by nothing. A horn sounded for the sponsored bracket. A tall boy in guild blue stepped forward with an armored iron boar twice Soot's height. He didn't wait for the whistle. He drove the boar straight at Soot's flank, aiming to shove him past the ring out line before the round even started clean. I watched the boar close the gap. Its right shoulder led every charge. Its left flank never turned toward us, not once, not even when the trainer barked a full pivot command. I filed that away in half a second. An injury. Something under that plating didn't want weight on it. I tapped my palm twice against my thigh. Soot drifted left, just a half step, testing it. The boar's trainer barked another pivot order. The boar planted its right leg and swung its head around instead of turning its body, refusing to load any weight onto the left side. "Soot, left," I said low. Soot didn't meet the charge head on. He cut sideways, fast, and let the boar's own momentum carry it past him. Boar tried to correct, planted its left leg to turn back, and its stride broke. It stumbled instead of charging again. Soot used the opening to slip behind it and tap its flank twice with a closed claw. Light as a knock on a door. No horn strike. No bite, just enough contact to end the exchange. Boar's trainer went red and grabbed the reins before the animal could try a third charge on its own. Soot backed off and sat down at the center line, tail curled around his feet, waiting for me the way he always did. Proctor lifted a slate over her head. Numbers rolled across the board in bright chalk light. 100s100 control score. Talia's voice cut through the applause from the rail. "That's a clean board. No forced strikes, no ring-out penalties," and he read an injury the trainers missed. She was already scribbling notes onto her scanner pad, the same one she'd used on Soot's evolved tissue 2 hours ago. The rankings board updated a moment later. My name climbed off the bottom row in one jump, past name after name, and settled inside the top 10. Last seed to the top 10 on a single perfect round. I felt my jaw tighten before I let it relax. Soot leaned his head against my leg, and I put a hand on his neck without looking down, still watching the board change. A steward walked over with a folded permit slip in one gloved hand. He held it up but didn't hand it over. "Gray Gate access is conditional," he said. "The board only releases it to trial candidates who clear the rescue stage. Score alone doesn't buy the gate." I took the slip anyway and read the fine print stamped across the bottom. Rescue stage. Smoke conditions. No mention of when. When does that run? I asked. Next block, the steward said. Smoke floods the maze in under an hour. You'll need every beast you've got in there, not just this one. He nodded at Soot and walked off toward the next candidate's table. I looked down at the permit slip, then at Soot, then past the rail toward the discard ward gate where Nix and Bramble were waiting out the trial in their crates. One perfect score didn't open anything by itself. It only bought us the right to try the next lock. I folded the slip into my jacket and pulled Soot up onto his feet. The board still glowed 100 over 100 above the ring, but the trial chit in my pocket now read 57,005. Smoke rolled through the maze gates before the horn even finished sounding. I grabbed Nix's harness and pulled her against my leg. Soot flared his wings once to push the first gray wall away from our faces. 3 examiners down, the trial marshal called from the observation tower. Find them before the clock finds you. The corridors branched white with fog machines built into the walls. Fake scent trails crossed every junction. Oil-soaked rags dragged in loops to confuse a beast's nose. I heard 2 other teams peel off after the wrong trail within seconds, their tamers shouting commands their beasts couldn't obey through the stink. Nix's nose wrinkled at the first branch. Her collapsed channel only ran at 21% since Talia's repair, and the fake trails hit her hard. She staggered, sat, pawed at her muzzle. I crouched beside her. I know it hurts, I said. One more push. She whined and pointed her nose down the left corridor anyway, ignoring 3 decoy trails that curled off to the right. That was the gap between 21 and whole. She could still find the real thread even half blind. I didn't wait to test it twice. I pulled the tailored crystal from my belt, the one Hob and I had built that morning from windfern resin and a sliver of the moonhorn dust left over from Soot's first meal. It was cut small, meant for a channel and nothing else. I knelt and held it out flat on my palm. Nix sniffed it once, then took it whole. Her whole body went rigid. Light traced up through her muzzle and behind her eyes, a thin gold line following the exact shape of the channel Talia had only partly cleared. The line reached her skull and steadied there. Nix sneezed, shook out her fur, and lifted her head into the smoke like she'd never smelled anything else in her life. Scent, Chanel stability, 21%, 100%. Bramble thumped his shell against the wall in something close to applause. Talia, stationed at the corridor gate with her scanner raised for the trial's medical log, stared at the readout twice before she spoke into her wrist comm. Full regeneration, she said. Confirmed, not cosmetic. Somebody logged that. I didn't wait for her to finish logging it. Nix was already moving, nose low, tail flagging left at every branch without a single wasted step. I ran behind her with Soot low to the ground beside me, wings tucked so he could fit the narrow turns. The first examiner was folded behind a collapsed support beam, coughing into her sleeve. I dragged the beam aside and got an arm under her shoulders. Soot took her other side without being told, careful with his claws against her ribs. The second was harder. Nix froze at a junction where 2 identical trails crossed, real scent and fake scent laid down at the same strength. "That's," she whined, unsure, ears flat. "Trust it," I told her. "You're not blind anymore." He pushed through the fake trail without flinching and led us to a sealed alcove. I forced the panel with my shoulder and pulled the second examiner out by the wrists before the smoke thickened enough to matter. The third was pinned under a fallen gate arm near the maze's center, ankle twisted wrong. Soot lifted the arm with his shoulder while I slid the man free, and Bramble braced his shell under the frame so it wouldn't drop back down on any of us. We carried all 3 out through the exit gate together. The marshal's horn cut off mid-blast when he saw us come through early. "Time," he called out, checking the board twice. 2 minutes. 11 seconds. Fastest clear this cycle, by a wide margin. The crowd along the rail went loud at once. I set the third examiner down against the wall and let the medics take over, my hands shaking only after there was nothing left to hold. The trial board's senior judge crossed the field toward me, tablet already open. "Control score, rescue time, 0 further injuries," he said. "That's your Grey Gate permit, Tamer, effective now." I took the printed slip from his hand. Behind him, Nix leaned into my leg, steady on her feet in a way she hadn't been an hour earlier. A Karst Guild courier reached the judge before I'd folded the permit into my coat. He held out a sealed complaint form, ink still wet. "Dangerous mutation," the courier announced, loud enough for the rail to hear. "Filed against the fox and the drake, effective immediately. Guild requests both creatures held for inspection before any gate entry." The judge read it once, jaw tight, and looked at the countdown board over the maze gate. 5410I. The Grey Gate permit sat in my coat pocket, and I didn't know yet if I'd be allowed to use it. I signed the expedition waiver before the ink on my Grey Gate permit had even dried. Provisional status meant no solo entry, the clerk said, tapping the clause twice so I couldn't miss it. I signed anyway. Soot climbed onto my shoulder and dug his claws in when he saw the 6 strangers waiting at the gate. "You're the Drake boy," their leader said. Broad shoulders, karst crest stitched into his collar. "Stay behind the line and don't slow us down." "Understood," I said, and meant none of it. The gate rolled open onto a cavern lit green by moss veins in the rock. The team leader pointed his lance at a ridge of pale stone scales half buried near the far wall. "Ironback basilisk. We strip the plate off it fresh, sell the set whole. Nobody touches it before I do." I froze. A fresh stripped plate meant a dead basilisk, and a dead basilisk meant no shed. Suit's channel needed molted armor. Plate. The creature had grown and dropped on its own, not meat cut from a living body. Feeding him a hunted plate would poison the channel Hob had spent 2 weeks tuning. I said nothing to the team. I dropped back a step and let the party push ahead toward the ridge. Scratch marks ran along the cavern floor where I stood. 4 parallel grooves dragged sideways instead of forward. Basilisks didn't walk sideways. They molted sideways, backing out of an old shell in the same motion every time. I followed the grooves away from the party, down a side crevice too narrow for the team's heavier armor. The crevice opened into a low chamber lined with shed plates, dozens of them, pale and empty, stacked against the walls like discarded shields. No basilisk slept here. This was the molting room, the place the adult came only to shed and leave. Moss light caught the curve of each plate, ridges worn smooth by years of the same creature backing out of the same shell. I knelt and lifted the newest plate, still faintly warm, the underside smooth where it had peeled clean off living scale. Soot pressed his nose to it and didn't flinch. Now, that was the sign Hob had told me to watch for, a channel accepting food before it even touched the tongue. Shouting broke from the main cavern, distant but sharp. I tucked the plate into my satchel and ran back toward the noise. The team had reached the ridge and found more than pale stone. A second passage behind it opened into a nest, eggs the size of barrels packed in warm sand, and the adult basilisk coiled around them had not been asleep at all. It came off the sand in one motion, faster than 6 armored men expected, and the ceiling above the nest cracked from the force of its first strike against a support column. "Fall back," the leader screamed, already running. 2 of his tamers didn't make it past the first collapse. A slab of rock sealed the passage behind them, and I heard their voices through the stone, high and scared, calling for a way out that the leader wasn't looking for. I was already moving before I decided to move. Crystal pillars ran the length of the chamber, feed lines for the cavern's moss light, thick enough to climb and spaced close enough to bridge the gap the collapse had opened. I grabbed the first pillar and hauled myself up. "Soot, low ground, keep it off the trapped ones," I called down. He didn't hesitate. He dropped from my shoulder and threw himself between the basilisk's tail and the sealed section of wall, wings spread wide enough to catch its attention, small enough that a direct hit could still kill him. The beast's tail cracked against the stone where he'd stood a half-second earlier. He was already airborne again, wheeling to bait it toward open ground instead of the trapped men. I crossed the second pillar and dropped into the gap on the far side, into a pocket of space the collapse hadn't fully sealed. Dust hung thick enough that I found the 2 tamers by sound before I saw them, coughing against the back wall, one bleeding from a gash along his forearm. "There's a crawl space above the slab," I said, pointing. "Go now, both of you. I'll hold the gap." They didn't argue. I braced my shoulder against loose rock while they climbed, feeling the basilisk's weight shudder through the floor with every strike it threw at Soot below. He kept moving, kept baiting, took 2 glancing hits off his flank that would have opened him to the bone if he hadn't rolled with them instead of standing his ground. The last tamer cleared the gap. I pulled myself up behind him as the chamber's far wall gave way completely, sealing the nest and the basilisk behind a wall of fallen stone neither side could cross. Soot landed beside me, wings ragged at the edges, breathing hard but standing. I checked the readout on instinct, palm flat against his side. Combat value 800-200. He'd leveled twice through the fight without touching a single killing blow. Ordinary growth earned by surviving something bigger than himself and keeping 2 strangers alive through it. The bleeding tamer stared at the number glowing faint under my hand, then at Soot, then back at me. "It was baiting the strikes," he said. "On purpose, the whole time." "He wasn't hunting," I said. "Neither was I." A new line surfaced on the ledger beneath the combat delta. Cold text over the warmth still fading from Soot's scales. "Scale meal condition. Hold against a greater force." I didn't know yet what it would cost to satisfy. The team leader's voice carried down the passage behind us, counting heads, missing 2 names he hadn't gone back for. A countdown band read the same number it had shown since the gate closed behind me. 51,005. The tunnel roof cracked above us. I grabbed Soot and rolled us both against the wall. Dust rained down in a gray sheet. The countdown on my wristband read 51,005 and kept ticking while the ceiling groaned a second time. Rock slid loose in a slab the size of a door. It slammed down 20 feet ahead and sealed the passage we had just walked through. Screams came from behind the new wall. 2 members of the expedition were trapped on the wrong side, closer to the basilisk's nest chamber. The team leader pushed past me toward the exit tunnel, the one still open. "Leave them," he said. "We pull back to the gate now, or we lose the whole party." I did not move. "They're still breathing. I can hear them." "That's an order, not a request." He grabbed my shoulder. I shrugged him off. Another slab dropped from the ceiling, closer this time. Passage above the trapped pair sagged in the middle like wet cloth stretched too thin. It was going to come down whole. I pulled the molted ironback plate from my pack. Talia's earlier scan had already confirmed it was clean, shed naturally, untouched by violence. I ground a corner of it against Hobbs' whetstone and caught the dust in a feed bowl. My hands shook. I steadied them by focusing on the grain of the plate, the way Hobb had taught me to read mana by texture instead of by panic. Soot planted himself under the sagging stone before I gave a single command. His small frame braced against rock that outweighed him 1,000 times over. His claws dug into the tunnel floor and held. Soot, "No, that's too much load." He did not back off. His wings flared for leverage. The stone pressed down on his shoulders and he pressed back up. I heard his bones creak under the strain and my stomach turned over, but he did not buckle. I finished the meal fast. Ironroot salt, moonhorn dust from the market whin, and now the molted plate ground into fine gray powder, folded together with pet food's purifying pulse until the mixture glowed a clean, steady blue. I set the bowl at Soot's feet without breaking his stance. "Eat when you can," I said. "I've got you." He lowered his head between strains and ate straight from the bowl while his legs still braced the ceiling. The glow spread from his throat down through his ribs. The stone above him held. Behind it, I heard the 2 trapped members scrambling clear of the widening gap Soot's brace had opened at the base of the slab. They squeezed through one at a time, coughing, dust-streaked, alive. Soot's whole body lit from within. Scales rippled outward from his spine in overlapping plates, each one thickening as it spread. His frame doubled in mass in seconds. Where a slim Drake had stood, an armored one now filled the tunnel, ridged shoulders wide enough to brace the whole passage without straining. The ledger flared blue-white in the air between us. DPOS, C Combat 1200, Poor Ludline, 14% Ludline, 14.7%, Swan Marks 1175. Ashscale Drake, I said out loud, tasting the name for the first time. The nest chamber beyond the rubble erupted. The adult basilisk had heard its territory breached and came for us at a dead run, armor plates scraping sparks off the tunnel walls. The team leader who had ordered me to abandon 2 of his own people froze against the wall, no order left to give. Soot turned to meet it. He did not wait for me this time either. He planted his new bulk across the tunnel mouth, 4 legs locked, and took the basilisk's full charge on his chest plates. The impact threw dust and grit the length of the corridor, so its feet skidded back 3 inches and stopped. He did not fall. The basilisk reared back and slammed a foreleg down where Soot's head had been a second earlier. Soot rolled his shoulder into the blow instead of dodging it, taking the strike on armor built to take it. Sparks skipped off his new plating and died in the dust. He answered with a shove of his own, driving one clawed foot into the basilisk's jaw and forcing its head up and away from the 2 of us. The basilisk snapped for his throat next. Soot ducked under the bite, came up inside its guard, and drove his ridged shoulder into its chest the way he'd braced the ceiling minutes before. The basilisk staggered a full step back into its own nest chamber. It reared for a second strike, found no opening, and let out a low, ringing snarl of Soot's own in answer, deeper than anything he'd had before. Basilisk hesitated, weight rocking between one foot and the other, then broke off and retreated deeper into its chamber rather than test the armor twice. Silence settled except for breathing. 6 survivors, 2 of them freshly pulled from behind a stone door, stood pressed against the wall where the Drake's body had shielded them from both the collapse and the charge. Talia pushed through the group towards Soot before anyone else moved, running both hands down his new plating, checking the seams where the old scales met the new. "He held the whole tunnel," Talia said, still working her hands along his shoulder. "I've scanned drakes twice this size that couldn't take that charge and stay standing. He held it against that." The team leader said nothing at first. He looked at the Drake who had ignored his order, then at the 2 people alive because of it. "Get us out," he said finally, quieter than before. "I'll walk behind him." They did. The party that had been ready to leave two of its own to die filed out of the gray gate behind Soot's armored back. Single file, nobody arguing about who went first. At the surface gate, a public scanner post logged every party exiting an active zone. The tech ran the beam over Soot without recognizing him at first, checked the readout twice, and looked up at me with his mouth open. Confirm C rank, he said. Registered evolution, verified on site. He stamped the log and turned the display so the rest of the gathering crowd outside the gate could see it glow. I did not smile. I watched the two rescued members walk to their families instead, and let that be the win. My wristband ticked over again. 47,030. That. 2 marks down. 5 to go, and the clock did not care that we'd just won. The auction floor buzzed under hanging crystal lamps. I shoved past 2 guild scouts and reached the front rail before the gavel fell. Inside a glass case sat the Emberlung core, veined red and gold, breathing faint heat against the glass. Soot needed it for the breath mark. I had 400 crowns in my pocket. The tribunal clock over the auctioneer's head read 47,000 and ticked down as I watched. 11,000, the auctioneer called. Going once. A merchant in a green cloak barked 11,500 from the side aisle, and the room turned to look at him. He wanted the core for show, not for a dragon. I could see it in the way he barely glanced at the glass. The auctioneer's gavel hovered. 2 guild scouts near the rail leaned in, waiting to see who'd crack first. A hand rose behind me. Roderick didn't bid twice. He lifted 2 fingers and the room went quiet around the number stitched to his family name. Sold. House Roderick. Roderick walked past the case without looking at it. He looked at me instead. You wanted this trash skill, he said. Now you get nothing. He kept walking. Kaiser's growl trailed behind him, and then both were gone into the crowd. I put my palm flat on the empty display glass before the porters could clear it. Pet food didn't need to hold the material to read it, only touch what had touched it. A green scan line crossed my vision and turned hard red. Clean compatibility, 11%. Feed that core to Soot at the breathmark stage and his channels would reject it outright. The mark burned raw before it ever unlocked. Roderick had just spent 11,000 crowns on a core that could hurt his rival's dragon worse than help it, and he didn't know it. A porter dumped the lot's trimmings into a bin marked for disposal. Scorched packing cloth, a cracked crate lid, 1 shriveled ash sack. I bought the whole bin for 6 crowns. The clerk laughed and took my coin. The ash sack split open under my thumb in the alley behind the hall. Most of it was dead tissue. 1 fragment near the core sat cool and steady, untouched by whatever forcing process had scorched the rest of the sack. I brought it to Talia that night. She laid it beside 3 karst pedigree certificates pulled from her own case files, beasts sold at premium prices for supposedly pure bloodlines. Her scanner passed over the fragment, then over each certificate's attached tissue sample in turn. Same signature, she said. All 4. Bob leaned in over her shoulder and didn't need long. Forced enhancement residue, he said. Someone's been cooking bloodline percentages hot and selling the burnout before it shows. Your fragment's clean because it never went near their furnace. The core did. The guild called a tribunal inside 2 days. Short, public, standing room only, because a karst certificate had just been named in the same breath as fraud. I stood at the evidence table with the fragment in one hand and one of Talia's scanners in the other. A pet food change holds, I said, and fed the fragment a half-gram of crushed feed crystal in front of the panel. The reading climbed and stayed climbed. It doesn't fade. A karst stimulant spikes a number, then bleeds it back down once the buyer's already paid. I set a second scanner on one of the certified tissue samples and let the room watch its number crawl backward on its own. No feed, no trigger, just decay. That's the difference. One is food. One is a loan you don't know you took. A woman in karst colors near the front stood halfway up, then sat back down when the head arbiter's eyes cut to her. Somewhere behind me, a guild scout muttered a number under his breath, recalculating what his own certified stock might really be worth. The gallery rail creaked as more bodies leaned toward the table to see the scanner's number keep sliding backward. The panel conferred for 4 minutes. I counted every one of them by the second scanner's slow decay, still crawling down on the table in front of me. The head arbiter's pen stopped twice and started again. Beside him, a second arbiter kept glancing at the split-open certificates, then at me, like he was checking the fragment hadn't moved. When the head arbiter finally set his pen down, the whole gallery went still enough that I heard the scanner's fan spin down. He suspended the flagged stock pending a full audit and awarded me the clean fragment outright as evidence compensation, mine to keep and use. Roderick shoved forward from the gallery rail. "This proves nothing about my core," he said, and drew it out to show the panel himself. The Emberlung core split down its center vein, a thin crack running the chandelier light in half, the same forced enhancement stress finally giving out under its own weight in front of the entire tribunal. Nobody spoke for a second. Then the murmur started, and it wasn't aimed at me. Talia caught my arm on the way out. "You got your Emberlung ingredient for 6 crowns and a tribunal instead of 11,000, she said. "Karst is going to notice who did that to them." Hob only nodded once, like a man closing a recipe book on the right page. The breathmark clue hadn't changed. I still needed the fragment purified and fed under the right condition before I could use it. But I had the clean piece now, and Roderick didn't have a core at all. The tribunal clock on the guild wall ticked down under the arbiter's seal, 4410 outer. I signed the tournament roster before Hob finished reading the prize list out loud. "Champion gets a Sky Ruins permit," he said. "Not participant. Champion." I already knew. The wingmark ingredient waited inside those ruins, and the countdown wasn't going to hold a second door open for me. Nyx pressed her nose against the bowl I set on the ward floor. Inside sat a wind moth meal, gray dust wrapped around 3 pale wing scales. She circled it twice, then ate. Her fur lifted like static catching a draft. Silver white streaked down her spine, and her single tail split into 3, each one trailing a thin ribbon of moving air. Talia's scanner beeped and settled on a number. 62 to 3110, she said. "That's not a level jump, Theo. That's a species shift. Gale tail fox." I didn't get to marvel at it. Bramble was already nosing his own bowl. I'd ground basilisk dust, mineral scrap left over from the Greygate collapse, into a plain feed crystal and set it by his cracked shell. He ate slower than Nyx, one careful bite at a time, like he expected someone to pull the bowl away first. His shell darkened plate by plate, layering into bronze scales that locked at every seam. Hob tapped the new plating with a spoon handle, and it didn't dent. 90 to 500, he read off the ledger over my shoulder. Bastion shell. That shell could stand up a doorway now. 2 evolutions before breakfast, and neither one carried Sit's name. The qualifier opened at dawn across 3 rings: combat, pursuit, and rescue. Roderick took the combat bracket the way he took everything, loudly. Kaiser tore through 3 opponents before the sun cleared the stands, mane snapping with each turn, muscle rolling under gold fur, claws throwing up sand in short, bright arcs. Roderick called the openings from the rail, and Kaiser cut the second opponent off before he'd even planted his back leg. The third opponent tried to circle wide, and Kaiser read it, closed the gap low, and put him down before the crowd finished gasping at the first 2 falls, dust still hanging in the air from the second hit when the third one landed. Roderick waved to the cameras like the win belonged to him instead of the lion doing the fighting. I watched for maybe a minute before I turned back to my own event. Nyx ran the pursuit course against sponsored racers on Hawks and Windrunners. The starting horn dropped, and she was 3 lengths clear before the other racers finished pushing off the line. A Windrunner tried to cut the first bend tight, hooves throwing gravel, and Nyx simply wasn't there anymore, already through the second gate before the dust from the first one settled. A Hawk rider banked low over the water hazard, wings flaring for lift, but Nyx cut straight through the shallows instead, 3 tails slicing the surface into 3 separate wakes that closed behind her like nothing had passed at all. She didn't just win it. She lapped the second-place beast before it reached the final gate, 3 tails streaming behind her like torn silk, and the Windrunner's rider was still shouting course corrections into a dead headset when she crossed the line. Hob had his stopwatch out at the finish line, and he clicked it twice like he didn't trust the first read. He crouched down, checked the number again against the board overhead, then stood back up, shaking his head. 12 seconds under course record, he said, showing me the face of it. 12. "That's not a fox anymore, Theo. That's a shortcut with fur on it." He said it loud enough for the sponsored trainers behind him to hear, and none of them argued. Bramble held the rescue floor. Actors playing trapped civilians crouched behind collapsing set walls, and every time a wall dropped, Bramble was already under it, shell locked, taking the weight before it landed on anyone. He didn't miss one. Not the prop pinned under a fake beam. Not the actor caught in a smoke pocket. Not the last target hidden behind a wall. Nobody expected to fall twice. A second smoke pocket lit up on the far side of the floor, and Bramble crossed the gap between them in 3 flat strides, shell already tucked low before the wall finished tipping. Between drops, he braced low and swept the loose rubble clear with the edge of his shell, so the next actor down had clean ground to land on instead of debris. One actor stumbled on the clear ground anyway, ankle catching a support cable, and Bramble caught the fall on his shoulder plate before the actor's knee hit stone. When a fourth wall dropped early, off the marked sequence, he was already moving before the safety horn finished sounding, bronze shell wedging into the gap a half-second ahead of the actor's shoulder, dust rolling off the plating in a gray sheet as the walls settled against him instead of the ground. The stands went quiet for a beat, then loud, the kind of loud that isn't scripted. Talia lowered her scanner and just watched him reset for the next wall. "That's not luck," she said. "He's reading the drop before the horn does." The scoring board flipped target by target until every icon along Theo's team line turned green. An official in a gray sash climbed the platform to read the combined results. "Combat bracket, Roderick and Kaiser," she called, and half the stands cheered on cue. Then she read the rescue tally. Rescue Division, number 1, the discard ward team. The cheer that followed was rougher, less rehearsed, from people who'd just watched a tortoise and a fox do something a champion's lion had never once had to try. Roderick's smile thinned when he heard it. "He didn't say anything to me." He didn't need to. The board scrolled once more and locked the final bracket in place. Combat champion against rescue champion, beast against beast, in the last match before the permit was awarded. Soot against Kaiser. I looked down. It was already sitting up, blue-gold scales catching the arena light, watching the board like he'd been waiting for someone to say it out loud. The gate clock over the tunnel ticked past the hour. 41,000. I set the clean emberlung fragment on the arena furnace's grate. 3 judges stood behind sealed glass with recording crystals raised. A referee read the bracket condition into a floating mic, so it had to release any new power without burning the opponent or the crowd, or the match ended in forfeit. Overhead, the stadium clock locked too, 41,000, and started counting down. I ground the fragment against ironroot ash until the mana smell changed from smoke to something sweeter. Pet food folded the residue down, layer by layer, until a single blue-gold crystal sat steaming on my palm. It read clean. It read clean. No flicker, no drift. I closed my hand around it and looked at soot across the sand. "Eat when I put it down," I told him. Not before. He watched me instead of the crystal. That was new. He used to watch the food. The horn blew. Roderick released Kaiser at the far end of the ring, and the Sunmane Lion came in already roaring, mane igniting gold along every hair. I placed the crystal in the feed bowl at Soot's feet and stepped back to the handler's line, the way the rules required. Kaiser's roar hit the barrier dome a half-second later. The dome held for 1 heartbeat, then cracked along its northern seam. Sunlight-colored fire poured through the gap and climbed toward the stands. Soot didn't eat first. He turned his head up. A breath came out of him that I had never seen. Not fire, not the pale flicker from his lizard days. Blue gold, dense as poured metal, aimed straight up through the widening crack in the dome. It met Kaiser's escaping flame 10 feet above the front row and split it clean in half, both halves curling harmlessly into the open sky instead of down into the seats. The crowd noise died for a second, then came back louder. Somewhere above the west, stand a broadcast crystal caught the split flame and threw it 30 feet tall across the scoreboard, and the section under it went from screaming to dead silent to screaming again, a wave of it rolling around the whole ring in under 3 seconds. A vendor's tray of feed crystals hit the floor 2 rows up. Nobody bent to pick it up. Only after that did Soot bend down and take the crystal from the bowl. His body changed shape while he swallowed. His scales darkened from silver to a deep blue edged in gold, and twin ridges rose along his spine like cooling metal setting into place. Steam rolled off him instead of smoke. When it cleared, a drake stood where the smaller shape had been, wings still folded but larger, a furnace glow burning low in his throat, panel over the ring lit with green marks. Crown mark unlocked. Breath mark. Rank, C to B. Combat value, 4,822,000. Bloodline, 27%, 43%. Crown marks, 2,047. Talia's scanner, aimed from the medic box, beeped twice and printed a hard copy before she even looked at the readout. She held it up without reading it out loud, just showed it to the nearest official, her mouth open. "That's not a stimulant curve," she said, loud enough to carry. "That's a second organ." He grew a second organ mid-match. She tapped the printed strip with one finger, tracing a line that spiked and then held flat instead of dropping. "And it's not shrinking back down. Whatever grew in there, it's staying." Kaiser didn't stop. He came in low across the sand, mane still burning, and Roderick shouted a command I couldn't hear over the crowd. Soot met him without lifting a claw. He lowered his head, and something pushed out from him that wasn't fire and wasn't wind, a pressure that flattened the sand in a ring around both beasts. Kaiser's stride broke. His legs folded first, then his head, until his chin touched the ground in front of Soot's feet. He wasn't burned. He wasn't bleeding, he was beaten, and he knew it before the sand had finished settling. The arena's broadcast crystal caught the whole bow and threw it onto every screen in the city. The royal Sunmane lion, kneeling to the beast his own guild had thrown in a discard bin. Roderick stood at his handler's line with both hands empty, staring at his own beast's back. He took one step onto the sand, then stopped himself, like he'd forgotten for a second that walking out there wouldn't change what every screen in the city had already shown. His jaw worked, but nothing came out. Hob pushed through the official's rope with his kit still slung over one shoulder. "Controlled release," he said, mostly to himself, running a hand along the new ridge on Soot's spine. He held that breath until it could go somewhere safe. Nobody taught him that. He watched the barrier crack before he watched the food, I said. He picked the crowd first. The head judge didn't wait for the formal scoring. She walked out onto the sand herself, tore a stamped permit from her binder, and pressed it into my hand. "Sky Ruins access. Provisional to permanent pending gate clearance," she said. "Effective now." The beast ledger threw one more line before it went quiet. "NEX target. Wing mark air requires material. Freely shed by a flying beast. Location, Sky Ruins." I read it twice. Nothing in Soot's kit or mine had ever come from something that gave it up on its own. Every ingredient so far had been salvaged, bought, or pried loose from a fight. This one wanted a gift, not a scrap. Kaiser lifted his head off the sand, slow, and looked at Soot the way he hadn't looked at anything in the ring all match. Not as an enemy, not as prey. He huffed once, low, and settled back onto his haunches beside his own handler's line. "Done." Roderick said nothing. He didn't call for a rematch, and the rulebook gave him 3 seconds to before the result locked. He let them pass. He let them pass. The stadium clock over the furnace ticked down as the officials cleared the sand. 40,000, 1,002, 39,002. I watched it instead of the crowd, because the numbers on that clock were the only ones in the arena that hadn't stopped moving for anybody. I picked Soot's spent bowl off the ground and turned toward the tunnel that led out toward the transport gates for the Sky Ruins climb. 3 marks down, 4 to go, and somewhere above the ruins a flying beast I hadn't met yet was going to have to decide, on its own, whether it trusted me enough to give something up. The gate clock read 37,000 when the tunnel doors closed behind us. The Sky Ruins gate wouldn't clear us for the climb until the provisional permit finished processing, so the tunnel from the arena spat us out back at the ward instead. A courier had already left a crate on the step, no name on it. I cracked the lid with a kitchen knife. Inside, wrapped in dry moss, sat a shard of storm glass, pale, veined with lightning white cracks, the exact shape the ledger had burned into my mind after the wing mark clue appeared. I checked the countdown out of habit. 37,000. 4 hours since Kaiser bowed on the broadcast, and I still hadn't slept. Soot's snout brushed my knee. I knelt and set the shard on the prep stone, and his eyes tracked it the way they tracked every ingredient before a meal. "Talia," I said, "run it." Her scanner hummed over the shard. "Storm charged. Matches the wing signature you described. I can't read intent off a rock, Theo. Only composition." Composition was enough for the ledger. I fed the shard into pet food anyway, purified it, and the crystal that came out glowed the pale blue-white of every wing meal sketch I'd memorized. I set the bowl down in front of Soot. He didn't move toward it. He'd never hesitated before a meal. Not once. Not for the fawn crystal. Not for the molted plate. Not for the ash sack fragment Hav had bled 2 days finding. He sat back on his haunches and looked at the bowl, then at me, then at the bowl again. The countdown ticked past 36,040 on the wall behind him. "He's just tired," I told Talia. "Big week. He's telling you something." I looked at the ledger readout floating over the bowl. Clean storm glass. Wing-compatible signature. Every number the system gave me said F. Feed him. I had a countdown bleeding away behind my shoulder and a system that had never lied to me before, and a lizard sitting still when he should have been eating. I crouched to Soot's eye level and put my hand flat on the prep stone between him and the bowl. "What is it, buddy?" He pressed his snout into my palm, then pulled back and looked at the bowl again, ears flat. Talia crossed her arms. "You keep asking him a question you're not going to answer with your ears. Look at the readout again. Now look at him. One of those 2 things in this room has been right every single time before today." "The ledger," I said. "Has the ledger ever run a scan on a stranger's crate before? On anything that didn't come out of your own kitchen or Hobbs stock?" It hadn't. Every crystal I'd ever fed Soot had come from a source I could trace with my own hands. Hobbs cuts, my own hunts, ingredients I'd watched get bled and boxed. This shard had shown up on the step with no name on the crate. I told myself that didn't matter, that the scanner didn't care where a thing came from, only what it was made of. I looked at the countdown again. 36, 15. Kaiser had bowed to a stadium full of people who thought soot was already finished growing, and the only path back to that broadcast ran through a wing crystal I didn't have time to source twice. Soot's tail thumped once against the stone, slow, unconvinced. I trusted the numbers. Eat, I said, and nudged the bowl an inch closer. Soot ate. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then his shoulder blades split the skin along his spine, and 2 half-formed wings punched out. Wrong wings, ragged membranes stretched over bone that hadn't finished growing, veins pulsing with light that had nowhere to go. He screamed, a sound I'd never heard from him, high and cracking. Blue-white current arced off the new wings and scorched a black ring into the prepstone. Talia grabbed my arm and hauled me back as a second discharge snapped past where I'd been kneeling. Soot dropped onto his side, wings twitching, breath coming in short barks instead of the low rolling growl I knew. The ledger panel over him flickered, threw up a wall of red static, and froze. "Ledger's locked," Talia said, scanner already sweeping his chest. "Read it while you still can." The last number before the freeze hung in the air, combat value. 22,000, 9,000. Kai as a based on who? I stared at it until the panel went fully dark. Talia's hands moved fast and sure, pressing a cold compress along the ragged wind joints, checking his pulse against her wrist timer. Monorejection, systemic. Whatever's in that shard, his body doesn't recognize it as feed, it recognizes it as an attack. She didn't look up. You saw him hesitate. Just stayed. I saw him hesitate. And you fed him anyway. I trusted the readout over him. Saying it out loud made my stomach fold in on itself, and I let that be the only feeling I named all night. Soot's flank rose and fell too fast under my palm. Talia sat back on her heels. I can flush the contaminant, but his channels are inflamed and the wing tissue is already trying to fuse wrong. You've got 4 hours before that becomes permanent damage instead of a bad night. 4 hours. I looked at the countdown. 34 to end falling. Then I need a purifier that isn't the ledger, I said, because the ledger just proved it can be wrong. Or fed wrong information, Talia said. She was already turning the shattered storm glass over with a gloved hand, sorting through the fragments scattered across the scorched stone. One piece, no bigger than a thumbnail, caught the ward lantern light at an angle the rest didn't. She held it up. A tiny press sigil sat inside the crack. Machine clean, nothing like the natural fracture lines around it. A crossed hammer seal stamped into the glass before it ever shattered. I'd seen that seal once before, burned into a karst shipment crate. "That's not weather damage," Talia said quietly. "That's manufactured. Somebody built this shard to pass your scan and fail inside him." "Karst," I said. The word came out flat. I didn't need her to confirm it. I picked up Soot as gently as I could get my arms under him, his ragged half-wings hanging useless against my forearms, and carried him toward the clinic cot. Talia kicked the clinic door open ahead of us and cleared a bench with one sweep of her arm. "Here, down, easy." She guided my hands so his spine stayed straight going onto the cot. The moment his weight left my arms, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Talia was already cutting away scorched scale along his shoulder, murmuring numbers to herself. Inflammation percentages, channel flow readings from a hand scanner that wasn't the ledger. She pressed 2 fingers under his jaw and counted against her wrist timer. "Pulse is fast but even," she said. "Best thing I've told you all night." Soot's eye cracked open, found me, and held there. I put my hand against his good shoulder, the one that hadn't split, and felt him lean into it, the smallest amount of body that hurt that much could manage. 4 hours, Talia said again, snapping open her kit. "Starting now." The countdown on the wall read 34,005 when the clinic door swung shut behind us. The ravine floor was slick with rain that hadn't stopped in an hour. I dropped to one knee beside a vein of gray-blue rock and scraped at it with a knife. Whitening cracked the sky white above the canyon walls. I reached for the ledger out of habit. Nothing answered. No panel, no glow, no numbers, just the rain on my hand and the knife scraping stone. 4 hours. 3 left now. I thought about every meal I'd ever fed, Soot with the ledger doing the thinking for me. The panel had told me what to cut, how fine to grind it, how long to wait. Out here it told me nothing. My own hands had to be enough, or Soot didn't get his 4 hours back at all. Nix rode my shoulder, ears swiveling against the wind. He chittered once and turned his whole body toward the east wall. I followed his line and saw a second vein higher up, catching less rain, sheltered under an overhang. That one, I said. Bramble planted himself between me and the open sky. Shell angled up, and a bolt struck the ridge above us a second later. The current ran down his shell and into the wet stone instead of into me. He didn't flinch. He'd taken worse than lightning guarding a bowl of feed crystals back at the ward, and this was just weather to him. I climbed to the overhang and pressed my palm flat against the new vein. Cold. Too cold. The storm shards from the crate had been cold too, and they'd nearly killed Soot. I moved my hand along the rock until I found a patch that held warmth from some deeper vein below it. Warm stone, not cold. Pop had drilled that into me over 100 meals. Feed heat, not shock. A body remembers the difference even when the mind doesn't. I pressed my thumbnail into the warm patch. It gave, soft at the edge, hard at the core. Storm shard had been hard all the way through, brittle, glass sharp. This gave. Soot's breathing had gone ragged since the clinic cot. Short barks instead of his low rolling growl. I'd counted them on the walk-in. 4 short, 1 long, 4 short, 1 long, a pattern that matched nothing I'd fed him before. I pressed the warm stone to my ear and knocked it once. It hummed back at almost the same rhythm. I cut a fist-sized chunk free and wrapped it in wet moss. Nix rode down off the overhang with me, still watching the wind, still quiet. Back at the ward, I grounded down myself. The powder caught the light when it was fine enough, and it smelled faintly of ozone when it was ready. I pressed it into a cake and set it in a bowl. My hands were shaking by the time I finished, and I let that be the only thing I named out loud all night. Soot lay on the cot, wings still ragged, breath still short. I knelt and set the bowl an arm's length away, not closer. I didn't nudge it. Your call, I said. He lifted his head. His eyes went to the bowl, then to me, the same look he'd given the storm glass the night before, except this time I didn't move the bowl an inch. I sat back on my heels and waited. Soot dragged himself off the cot on his own legs and put his snout in the bowl. He ate. His whole body eased first, shoulders dropping, ragged wings folding flat against his spine instead of twitching. Then his breathing slowed, the short bark stretching back into the long, rolling growl I knew. Talia's scanner, still clipped to the cot rail, chimed and threw a fresh readout into the air over him. Combat value, W. 9,000, 22,000. Talia looked up from her notes. That's not a partial recovery, that's everything back. She crossed the room and put a hand flat on Soot's flank, checking it against her own reading, like she didn't trust the number until her palm agreed with it. You did that without the ledger. I did that because I stopped trusting the ledger. A soft chime sounded behind me. The panel over Soot flickered once and came back, not red static this time, but clean amber text scrolling into place. The wing recipe rewrote itself in front of me, the old entry crossed out, a new line beneath it. Wing component must be freely shed by a living flying beast. A harvested or extracted material will fail. I stared at the line. Whoever built that storm glass hadn't just sabotaged a meal. They'd fed the ledger a lie about how windmills worked at all. A lie built to look exactly like the truth until Soot's body proved otherwise. The wolf's head seal in the broken shard sat in a dish on Talia's tray, catching the lantern light. If the recipe was wrong on purpose, Talia said, somebody wanted you to keep feeding him poison and call it progress. I picked up the seal and turned it once in the lantern light before setting it back down. Somewhere out there, someone had planned exactly how Soot would fall. The countdown on the wall ticked to 31,000. I climbed over a fallen archway and dropped into the sky ruins ahead of Talia and Hob, boots crunching on frost-cracked stone that hadn't felt weight in 1,000 years. Wind screamed through the broken columns above us. I put a hand flat against the nearest wall and felt carvings under my palm before I saw them. Somewhere above the ruin, the countdown burned, 31,000 at the corner of my vision. Careful, Hob said, catching up with his cane clicking on stone. This place doesn't forgive a wrong step. I traced the carving with 2 fingers, clearing centuries of grit. A robed figure knelt over a bowl, and above the bowl a beast rose whole from smoke. Not a weapon, not armor, just a creature standing up again. Hob, look at this. He crouched beside me, breath fogging, and went still. That's not a kitchen scene, Theo. That's a restoration rite. Talia swept her scanner across the wall, and the whole mural lit pale gold under her light. Dozens of panels marching off into the dark. Cooks kneeling over bowls. Beasts collapsing into ash and rising again whole. A crown-shaped table at the center of every panel. After the first gate catastrophe, Hob said, reading the inscriptions his fingers found before his eyes did, half the beast species on this continent came through broken, wrong limbs, no breath, dying species nobody could feed back to health with ordinary food, so someone built a craft to fix that, the crown table. The crown table, I said, tracing the carved shape again to be sure. That's what stamped on Sid's collar tag. Hob nodded, tapping the crown at the mural's center. Feed the ingredient to the wound the beast already carries, and the beast comes back whole. This is pet food's real name, not a fighting art, a conservation craft. I looked at the ledger scar on my palm, the one that let me read every meal I'd ever fed Soot, and it felt heavier than it had 5 minutes ago. A wyvern's shriek cracked across the ruin, close and furious. I was moving before Talia finished turning. I vaulted a collapsed pillar and came out on a ledge overlooking a nest built into the cliff face. 3 storm wyvern eggs, veined with the same lightning white pattern as the stormglass shard that had nearly killed Soot, and 2 men in guild gray scrambling down the rock with a canvas sack between them. Wolf's head seals stamped the sack's strap. Karst, those eggs stay in that nest, I shouted, and one of the men looked up, panicked, and dropped a hand toward his belt instead of the eggs. His partner was already knotting the sack shut over the 3rd egg, boots skidding on loose scree, eyes flicking between me and the sky like he expected the storm to answer before I did. They're not stealing for a shop, Talia said behind me, scanner already reading the storm building overhead. Stolen eggs from a wyvern nest. That's not theft, that's bait. They want the mother enraged and hunting, something they can report as an attack. The wyvern screamed again, wing beats hammering wind down into the ruin hard enough to knock dust off every ledge. I didn't wait for the karst agents to decide anything. I went down the rock face at an angle no sane climber would take, grabbed the strap out of the nearer agent's hand, and he let go rather than fight a man moving that fast toward an angry mother. Run, I told him, and he did. I climbed the last stretch to the nest with the sack in my teeth, rock crumbling under 2 fingers before I found a real hold, and set the 3 eggs back into the warm stone hollow one at a time, careful, palms flat under each shell, checking each one for cracks before I let go. The wyvern dropped onto the ledge above me, wings blotting out the gray sky, storm crackling blue along her spine. I didn't run. I put both empty hands up where she could see them and backed off the nest, slow. She looked at the eggs. She looked at me. Then she lowered her long neck until her head was level with mine, close enough that the ozone smell of her breath stung my eyes, and held still. Theo, Talia called from above, voice tight, don't move. I didn't move. The wyvern's head tilted, and one long feather along her wing crest came loose on its own. No pull, no fight, just a soft release, drifting down and landing across my open palms. It hummed with the same charge as her storm, pale blue-white, whole and clean, nothing like the manufactured shard that had put half-formed wings through Soot's back. She pulled her head up, screamed once more at the sky instead of at me, and settled over her nest. I climbed back up shaking, the feather still humming in my hands. The beast ledger scar on my palm flared to life the second I cleared the ledge, and text burned across it in front of Talia and Hob both. Wing meal, 3 ingredients. Talia let out a breath she'd clearly been holding since the wyvern's first scream. Freely given, she chose that. He didn't take a single thing from that nest that wasn't already coming loose. Hob's cane thumped once against stone. Keep that feather close, Theo. Whatever's waiting deeper in this ruin is going to want proof the table still works before it opens for us. We found the last mural panel deeper in the ruin, past a collapsed archway Hob had to blast clear with a flare charm. This one showed the crown-shaped table again, but underneath it, carved into the rock like a second building buried beneath the first, ran a vast storeroom sealed behind stone doors. The World Pantry, Talia read off the glyphs, scanner throwing pale light across the doors. There's a condition carved under it. Hob crouched and brushed centuries of dust off the final glyphs himself and read it out loud so there'd be no mistaking it. D.E. Fend a home the beast chooses. Wind cut through the broken archway above us, colder than it had been 10 minutes ago, storm still rolling somewhere over the wyvern's ledge. I closed my hand around the stormglass feather, felt the ledger scar pulse once against my palm, and looked at the countdown burned into the corner of my vision. 28,000. The rope and stone bridge groaned before it broke. 2 karst agents cut the anchor lines behind them as they fled the ruins, and the whole span buckled sideways under our boots. Planks split in a line straight toward Nyx. I grabbed the guide cable with both hands. Talia grabbed the sealed case holding the wyvern's feather. Bramble planted his shell against the swaying rail to keep the near half from folding. Nyx didn't reach anything in time. The middle section dropped away under her paws. She clawed at splitting planks, missed, and went over the edge into white cloud without a sound. I didn't give Soot an order. He was already gone, wings still too small to hold his weight, diving straight down the chasm after her before I'd finished shouting her name. His tail was the last thing I saw before the cloud took him too. I ran to the broken edge and looked over. nothing but white below, and the wind pulling loose feathers of mist up past my face. My hand found the sealed pouch at my belt, the wing meal, 3 ingredients, complete since the ruins, the wyvern's freely shed feathers still warm inside it. I'd carried it for 2 days waiting for solid ground and a clean bowl. I hadn't planned to use it mid-fall. I didn't have a second plan. Bob shouted something behind me about the ravine current, about how a body could hit rock 100 feet down before the cloud even thinned. I didn't wait to hear the rest of it. I stepped off the broken bridge after my own beast. Wind tore the shout out of my throat on the way down. Cloud closed over my head, cold and wet, and for 2 full seconds I couldn't see my own hands. I found Soot by sound before I found him by sight. A high scraping cry, wings snapping open and folding, opening and folding again, too small to catch real air. He'd reached Nyx and wrapped his body half around hers, but he couldn't slow either of them. I fell past a jagged spire of ruined stone close enough to graze my shoulder, caught his foreleg on the second pass, and hauled myself against his side. I pressed the meal against his jaw with a shaking hand. He ate without hesitating. No pause at the bowl this time. No flinch from the memory of a poisoned meal weeks ago. No hesitation like the one that had cost him 9,000 combat points and 4 hours of my life. His spine arched. New membranes split through the skin along his forelimbs, wet and silver blue, unfurling faster than gravity could outrun it. The same half-formed wings the Stormglass sabotage had ruined, finally given somewhere real to go. Feathered light traced every wingtip, bright enough to throw shadows through the fog. He roared once, and the sound split the cloud layer open around us like a struck bell. The ledger opened across my vision. Steady, no lock icon this time. Wingmark, 1 locked. ABA AF4A, the generated is stacked. Combat 22, 78,000. Bloodline 43%, 61%. Crown marks 3747. His new wings caught the next updraft and held. He banked under Nyx before she reached the lower rock shelf, took her weight against his back, and leveled out flat, wing beats steadying with every stroke like he was learning the shape of them as he used them. I was still falling below both of them. He curled around under me a half-second later, one wing folding into a seat, claws hooking gently under my belt so I wouldn't slide free. Talia's voice cracked over the expedition line. Everybody's rig is still recording. Say something for the log, Talia. She didn't wait to be asked twice. Full A-rank musculature, live, mid-flight, completely unsedated. Her voice shook on a last word, not from fear. 4 separate scanners are reading the same number. I need that on record before anyone says stimulant again. Top leaned over the rail of the broken bridge, hands cupped around his mouth. You fed him mid-fall. Couldn't you wait for solid ground? He didn't wait for me, I shouted back. I wasn't going to make him wait for a bull. Soot climbed. Every downbeat of those new wings threw spray off the cloud in ribbons, wide silver arcs that caught the low sun and scattered it across the ravine wall. Every camera on that wall swung to follow him. Talia's scanner rig, Hobbs' belt recorder, the 2 surveyors still stranded on the far shelf holding their own field cameras with white knuckles, even the karst drone hovering where its handlers had abandoned it after cutting the bridge. Nobody on that wall was looking anywhere else. Nyx pressed her muzzle into his scales and didn't try to climb off. Her ears stayed flat, her whole body trembling from the fall, but she made no sound at all. She just held on, one paw curled into the ridge along his spine. I checked the pouch at my belt out of habit. Empty. 3 ingredients. 1 meal, nothing saved back for later. That was the whole lesson Hob had been feeding me since the discard ward. Use what's in front of you, don't hoard it for a better moment that might not come. Soot swept back toward the ruins in one wide arc, low enough that his wingtip nearly brushed the collapsed stone columns below. He was wide enough now to lift the 2 stranded surveyors off the rock shelf on his second pass, one gripping each foreleg, and he carried all 4 of us plus their gear back toward the bridge without a single wasted beat. He set us down on the intact half one at a time, gentlest with Nyx, setting her paws on solid stone before he even let go of my belt. Talia ran her scanner over him again, the second his claws touched stone, slower this time, channel by channel, reading his new wing muscle in strips across her display. Every reading stable, no rejection artifacts anywhere, nothing like the Stormglass batch. She looked up at me. You had a falling beast and a falling handler, and you still fed him the right meal on the first try. I didn't get a second try, I said. Hob climbed down to us across the broken planking, favoring his bad knee, one hand braced on the splintered rail the whole way. The mural chamber said the ingredient had to be freely shed. Nobody said anything about being fed mid-fall off a cliff. He almost smiled, the kind of smile he never gave in the kitchen. 4 marks now. 4. I looked at Soot. He wasn't looking at me. He was nudging Nyx upright with his snout until she stood on her own four paws again, his new wings still half spread on the stone like he hadn't decided yet whether he trusted solid ground more than the air he'd just learned to hold. The ledger hadn't closed. One more line sat under the mark count, colder than everything that had just happened. Countdown, 24 taud, 24 hours. A third of the clock, gone since the awakening hall. We came down off the ruins straight into trouble. I smelled the ward before I saw it. Smoke, cold metal, and torches burning oil instead of fuel crystal. Cursed guild banners hung across the discard ward's gate, and a line of armored agents blocked every entrance. I pushed through the crowd at the fence with Nyx on my shoulder and Bramble crashing a path behind me. A guild herald read from a scroll bolted with the royal seal. By emergency pedigree law, all beasts displaying unregistered evolution are seized pending inspection. Behind him, agents dragged crates toward the gate. Chains rattled inside the crates. A caged screecher hawk beat its wings against the bars until feathers came loose. I counted the agents at the gate. 6 in front, 4 more at the side fence, all in karst colors. None of them wore trial board seals. This wasn't the Independent Trials Authority. This was Karst's own guard, dressed up in an emergency law he'd probably written himself an hour ago. Soot stood in the yard, wings half spread, blocking 3 cages full of ward strays. Hobbs stood beside him with a cleaver in each hand. Talia had her scanner raised like a shield, not a tool. Every evolved beast in this ward is an illegal mutation, the herald said. Guildmaster Kerst's orders. Nina waited at the edge of the crowd, hood up, hand shaking. She caught my eye and tilted her head toward the alley beside the ward wall. I went. Bramble stayed to guard the gate. She pulled a scorched data shard from her sleeve and pressed it into my palm. This is from Kaiser's saddle armor. I pulled it myself 2 nights ago. The shard's readout showed a feed schematic, a hidden crystal chamber wired into the girth strap. Karst placed a forced feed crystal inside Kaiser's armor. It's been dosing him since before the awakening hall. His bow to soot wasn't bloodline instinct, it was the crystal cracking under stress. I turned the shard over once. You're telling me the bow that got me my trial was rigged. I'm telling you, Karst is capable of anything to keep Roderick on top, and now he's coming for your whole ward. Her voice caught. I should have told you the day I pulled it. Why didn't you? I was still choosing Roderick's status over telling you the truth. I told myself I needed more proof first. That was a lie I told myself, not you. She looked at the shard in my hand, not at me. I'm sorry. You don't have to be sorry for choosing him, I said. You have to live with it, that's different. I closed my fist around the shard. We stopped being partners the day you unbuckled that band and walked into his stable. This doesn't change that, it just means I believe you about the crystal. She flinched at that, small, like she'd hoped for a different ending and known better than to expect one. Behind us, past the alley mouth, another crate lid slammed shut. She nodded once, fast, like she'd expected exactly that answer and had already grieved it. What are you going to do? Feed my animals, I said, and walked back toward the gate. The herald was still reading demands when I reached Hobbs' side. 2 guild agents had Nyx's kennel mate, a scarred windfox pup, half lifted into a crate. I didn't argue with the herald. I went straight to the prep stone Hobb had dragged into the yard and laid out what was left in my satchel, a strip of dried ember hide, a fistful of river salt, and a shaving of the molted plate Soot had shed weeks back, still sitting in a jar nobody had used yet. Role specific, Hobbs said, reading the spread over my shoulder. Not general feed. You're gearing them for a fight, not a parade. They're about to need a fight, I said. I cut the ember hide into thin strips and packed them with salt for Nyx, a speed and stamina blend built for short, violent bursts, the kind of meal you feed a scout before a breach. Nyx ate it off my palm in 3 bites, ears already up, weight shifting forward onto her front paws like she was bracing to run before she'd finished chewing. The ledger panel on my wristband lit green. NIX, speed 310, 460. She won't outrun a crossbow bolt, Hobbs said, but she'll outrun the hand that fires it. I ground the shell shaving into paste for Bramble next, folded it through a slurry of hard root and mineral clay, packing dense and slow burning, built for absorbing hits rather than dealing them. Bramble took the whole bowl in one motion of his beak, planted himself in front of the nearest cage, and didn't move again. His shell darkened along every seam, plates thickening visibly at the rim. Bramble. Defense 500, 760. Good, Hobbs said, because that gate's not holding on its own. The herald noticed the feeding and signaled 2 more agents forward. Feeding does not exempt seizure. Every animal in this compound is subject to inspection. Talia stepped between the agents and the cages, scanner still raised. Then inspect properly. Every reading I've logged says these are natural evolutions under mana channel strain, not mutations. You want to seize based on a guess, you'll answer for it on record. The herald hesitated, glancing back at the banner line for orders that didn't come. One of his agents lowered his crate and looked at Bramble's darkened shell, then at the crossbow slung on his own back, and didn't reach for it. Soot moved without me telling him to. He stepped between the cages and the herald, wings spreading wide enough to shadow the whole prep stone, and lowered his head until his eyes were level with the man's. He didn't growl. He didn't need to. The herald took one step back on his own. I stood between the ranked agents and my animals, Suit's shadow falling over all of us, and I didn't offer the ward up. Nobody inside these fences was going in a crate. We don't surrender anything, I said. Not one creature. The herald's scroll rolled shut. He didn't call the retreat. He didn't call the advance either. Somewhere past the banners, a horn sounded once, low and long, the kind that meant reinforcements were already moving. The ledger panel on my wrist pulsed once, cold against my skin. Countdown, 20,000 million better. A chain snapped somewhere behind the ward's east fence. I'd been checking Bramble's shell seams for cracks when the sound reached me. My hands were still dusted with the mineral paste I'd been rubbing into his shell plates. I turned toward the sound. A shape with a lion's chest, a scorpion's tail, and a wolf's head burst through a smoke curtain. First handlers scattered in fake panic, waving their arms like they hadn't planned this. It escaped from Theo's ward, one of them shouted, pointing at my gate. I didn't answer him. I ran for the cages. Nyx streaked past me low to the ground. Her tails cut through a capture net strung across the south path, and the severed rope hissed as it fell into the dirt. Two Karst agents dropped their own nets and backed away from her claws. A third agent tried to reset a trapline, and Nyx sliced through that rope too, without slowing down. Bramble planted himself in front of the recovery tent. He pulled his shell wide and low, and 6 patients crawled underneath the shadow of it. A stray energy bolt cracked against his shell plating and skidded off into the dirt. A second bolt hit the same spot, and Bramble didn't move an inch. Every beast in the ward moved into a roll like they'd rehearsed it. A one-winged hawk carried bandages between cages, dropping them beside anyone bleeding. A 3-legged hound dragged a fallen post out of a fleeing child's path. An old spotted lynx herded 3 loose kits toward the water trough and stood guard over them. None of them waited for a whistle or a hand signal. The chimera swung its wolf head toward the weakest row. The rejected cages sat there in a line, thin bars, old latches, animals too injured to run. A cracked shell turtle pressed itself into the corner of its cage. A blind ember bird beat its wings against the bars, unable to see the threat coming. I'd fed both of them just that morning, and neither could take a single hit from something that size. Soot. I started to call his name. He was already moving. Soot crossed the open yard before I finished the word. He planted himself between the chimera and the first cage, wings half spread, tail low, scales catching the last orange light of the afternoon. He hadn't waited for my command. He'd chosen the ward before I ever opened my mouth. The chimera's scorpion tail slammed down at him. Soot caught the blow on his shoulder plate and skidded back 3 feet through loose gravel. Dust kicked up around his feet. Behind him, the cage door rattled on its hinges and held. A woman's voice came from the crowd gathering at the fence. "That's the discarded lizard," she said to the man beside her. The one Roderick threw out. I heard her, and something in my chest unclenched that I didn't have time to name. The chimera reared back and struck again, faster, aiming its claws at the turtle's cage. Soot threw himself sideways into the strike and took it across the ribs instead. He grunted but didn't fall. The beast ledger flared gold across my vision. Heartmark. Condition met, defend a home the beast chooses. Light poured out of Soot's chest in a slow, steady wave, nothing like the violent burst of his earlier evolutions. His scales spread wider along his spine. New membrane unfurled between longer wing bones. A soft interior glow lit his ribs from beneath the skin like a lantern behind glass. His injured shoulder sealed shut in front of the entire crowd. Sanctuary Dragon. Rank AS Combat Value 78,000 to 10,000. Bloodline 61%, 79%. Crown marks 47257. The chimera lunged again, aiming its wolf jaws at the nearest cage. Soot didn't retreat this time. He spread his new wings and a dome of pale gold light rose around the entire ward, curving over the cages, the recovery tent, and every patient huddled beneath Bramble's shell. The chimera's claws struck the dome and slid off it like water off glass. It struck again, and the light didn't crack. It struck a third time and staggered backward, off balance, its own momentum thrown back into its shoulder. Soot stepped forward inside the dome, calm now, and pressed one clawed foot down against the packed dirt. A ring of light spread out from that single point and wrapped around the chimera's legs. The creature thrashed once, twice, then went still, held but unhurt, its chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. Not one cage had broken. Not one patient under Bramble's shell had a new scratch. Nyx folded her tails and stood panting at the fence line, watching the dome hold. Blind Emberbird stopped beating its wings and settled back onto its perch, calmed by the low hum coming off Soot's scales. I walked into the dome's fading edge and knelt beside the chimera's flank. The brand was burned into the loose skin near its shoulder, half hidden under matted fur. I brushed the fur back with 2 fingers. The mark underneath was a stamped crest, 3 interlocking rings, the same seal I'd seen on Karst's supply crates outside the auction hall. A city drone hovering at the fence line swiveled its lens down toward the brand and held there. Alia pushed through the gathered crowd with her scanner already raised. She crouched next to me, aimed the beam at the seal, and the readout on her screen matched it instantly against a registry file. "That's a Karst transport brand," she said. "This animal didn't escape from anywhere. It was delivered." He turned the scanner screen so the drone could catch it too, the match highlighted in red across the display. Pop arrived at the fence a moment later, out of breath, and looked from the Chimera's brand to the dome of light still holding over the wart. He didn't say anything. He just nodded once, like a man confirming something he already suspected. The crowd at the fence had gone quiet. Someone near the front lifted a phone toward the drone's angle, toward the brand, toward Soot standing calm and glowing inside his own dome of light. A man in a guild courier's jacket muttered that he'd deliver this footage to the trial board himself before nightfall. The Karst handlers who'd started the smoke curtain were already backing toward the tree line. One of them tripped over the same rope Nyx had cut and went down in the dirt. Nobody in the crowd moved to help him up. I looked down at the Chimera's slowing breath, then up at Soot. 5 marks lit along the ledger's edge now, gold where they used to be dark. Bramble lowered his shell and let his patients out into the open air, unharmed, blinking at the dome of light fading above them. The dome held steady around the ward a moment longer, and past the fence, past the drone, I heard sirens starting up somewhere near the guild district. Hurst's agents were already gone, but the brand on the Chimera's shoulder wasn't going anywhere, and the drone footage wasn't either. Somewhere behind me, the courier was already talking fast into a comm unit, repeating the transport seal's number twice to whoever answered. The countdown ticked over on the ledger's corner, 15,004. 2 marks left, and less than 16 hours to find them. Kaiser's roar cracked across the guild district before the sirens even faded. I turned toward the sound. A golden mane whipped sideways, too fast, too wrong, and the lion's shoulders doubled in size in front of my eyes. Roderick sprinted out of the crowd with both hands raised. "Karst's got a crystal in him," he shouted. "He's activating it remotely right now." Kaiser's eyes rolled white. His claws tore 4 furrows into the plaza stone. Bystanders scattered toward the Guildhall steps, dragging children by the arm. A market stall, 2 rows back, tipped over and spilled crates of dried fruit across the cobblestones. Kaiser's chest heaved with each breath, ribs pressing visibly against skin gone taut and hot. Steam rose off his shoulders where sweat met the rising heat under his fur. Talia's scanner beeped a warning tone and she backed away from the beam. "Forced feed crystal," she said. "It's cooking him from the inside. He's going SS whether his body can hold it or not." Roderick grabbed my sleeve. His knuckles were white around the fabric. "Don't kill him," he said. He said, "Please. He's mine. I'll fix this. Just don't kill him." I pulled free and looked past him at Kaiser's shaking frame. The mane ignited into real fire, strand by strand, until the lion stood wrapped in a corona of solar light too bright to look at straight on. AISR, Solar Tyrant Unstable. Heat rolled off him in a visible shimmer, bending the air above the cracked stone. A stray tongue of flame licked out and caught the edge of the overturned fruit stall, and dried fruit crackled into ash in seconds. Roderick ran at his own beast with empty hands and got thrown 15 feet by a heat wave he never touched. He hit the ground hard and skidded, and blood welled along one scraped forearm. I ran toward him instead of away. "He needs food, not a fight," I said. "Something his body can actually use, or that crystal burns him out from the inside." Nyx streaked past my legs toward the ward fence, already calling to the animals behind it. A 1-winged hawk dropped a strip of dried meat at my feet. A 3-legged hound limped up and set down half a fish it hadn't finished eating. Bramble cracked his shell an inch and pushed out a bundle of moss root he'd been saving. More animals pressed against the fence rails behind them, offering what they had without being asked. "These are from the ward," I said. "The ones Kaiser guarded during the raid." Roderick stared at the small pile growing at my knees. He didn't say anything. I dropped to a crouch and started grinding the offerings together against a flat stone, Fast, my hands already burning where sparks off Kaiser's mane landed on my knuckles. The dried meat crumbled under the stone. The fish oil bound it into a paste. Moss root snapped into fibrous strands that held the mixture together. Kaiser's roar climbed another octave behind me, and cracks spread wider through the plaza tile under his feet. Soot pushed his snout into the mix without waiting to be asked. He tore a chunk from his own half-eaten dinner, the meal I'd packed him that morning, and dropped it into the paste. Soot, that's yours, I said. He nudged it deeper into the mixture and looked up at me, steady, like the question didn't need an answer. I pressed the countermeal into a rough ball and held it out toward Kaiser's open, screaming jaw. The lion's teeth closed around it on instinct. Kaiser's throat worked once, twice, and the corona around his mane guttered like a candle in wind. The beast ledger flared gold across my vision. Crown mark. Condition met, save a rival bloodline. Light rolled off Soot in a slow wave, gold turning to a deep astral blue at the edges, and his wings stretched wider than the ward fence behind him. Crowned Astral Dragon. Rank SSS. Combat value 200,000, 720,000. Bloodline 79%, 94%. Crown marks 5767, 67. Roderick staggered back to his feet and stared up at Soot's new shape without blinking. That's not possible, he said. That's not. He was a discard. I threw him out. Kaiser's mane dropped from white fire to ordinary gold. His shoulders shrank back toward their normal size. He folded down onto the plaza stone, breathing hard, stable, alive. The cracked tile beneath him stopped spreading, and the heat shimmer in the air faded to nothing. Roderick dropped to his knees beside his beast and pressed both palms against Kaiser's flank like he needed proof it was real. Kaiser's tongue dragged once across Roderick's scraped forearm, slow, almost gentle for a beast that size. Talia's scanner beeped clean readings, no fever spike, no crystal signature left active. He's stable, she said. Whatever you fed him, it worked. The crowd that had scattered earlier crept back toward the plaza edge, phones raised, none of them speaking above a whisper. Roderick looked up at me from the ground. His voice cracked on the first word. Karst put that crystal in him during the last exam, he said. Told me it was a growth accelerant. Told me every heir's beast gets one. I didn't ask what it actually did because I didn't want to know. He pulled a folded seal from inside his jacket and held it out toward me. 3 interlocking rings pressed into old metal, the same crest branded on the Chimera's shoulder. World Pantry Seal, he said. Karst gave it to my family generations back. Take it. I'm done protecting him. I took the seal from his open hand. A drone overhead swiveled its lens down and caught every second of it. Someone in the crowd started recording on a handheld screen, holding it steady on the seal in my hand. Roderick stood, faced the drone straight on, and raised his voice loud enough for the gathered crowd to catch every word. Guildmaster Karst runs a forced evolution program on air beasts, he said. I have the crystal batch records. I'll hand them to the city guard tonight. The plaza went silent except for Kaiser's slow, even breathing. Talia lowered her scanner and looked at Roderick like she was seeing him for the first time. I stood there holding the seal, and the weight of it felt heavier than its size should have allowed. The ground under the guild district groaned, a low grinding sound that traveled up through the stone into my boots. Crack split the plaza tile in a jagged line running toward the guild hall steps, and dust sifted up out of it like smoke. Another line branched off it, wider, running under the fountain in the plaza center until the water inside tilted and drained straight down into the widening seam. The gate, Talia said, already backing away from the fissure. Whatever that crystal was drawing on, it wasn't just Kaiser. Roderick pulled Kaiser to his feet and steered him away from the widest crack, one hand still pressed flat against the lion's flank. I looked down at the seal in my palm, 3 rings pressed cold against my skin, and closed my fingers around it. The beast ledger's corner display ticked over. 11,000. 6 marks lit gold along the ledger's edge. 1 left, and the ground beneath the city kept splitting wider. The ground split open behind the guild hall. A black ring tore through the pavement, no bigger than a manhole, but it pulled at everything near it. Lampposts bent toward it. Loose gravel lifted and vanished into the ring. Nix yelped and dug his paws into the street to keep from sliding. Knollcrest Gate, Roderick said. He stood beside Kaiser, one hand still on the lion's stabilized mane. It's drawing mana off every beast in the block. Soot's crown scales caught the black light and pulsed. All 6 marks on his chest flared at once, gold lines racing across ash-dark scales. The world pantry seal in my pocket burned hot enough to feel through the fabric. I pulled it out. The seal split like a folded map, and a doorway opened in the air above the crack, stone stairs leading down into warm orange light. Pantry's open, I said. Move. I went first. Talia followed with her medic bag still slung across her back. The masted or cumextitted bramble squeezed through sideways, shell scraping both walls. Nina came last, watching the street behind them for anything that might follow. The stairs ended in a round chamber lit by no visible flame. I expected shelves, weapons, some legendary cut of meat locked behind glass, the thing every guild in the city had bled for. Instead, there was a cooking platform, bare stone, waist height, empty. That's it? Nina said. Years of guilds fighting over this place, and it's a countertop. Soot patted onto the platform and pressed one claw against its surface. Text rose out of the stone in gold script, the same script my ledger used. Efferings asked offerings. 07 rest Shepherd, harmless material, willingly given, from 7 restored bloodlines. Talia read it twice. Willingly given, not taken. That's the whole point, I said. Every gate closes on a fed world, not a beaten one. The chamber shuddered. Dust sifted down from the ceiling in a fine gray sheet. Above them, through the open stairwell, a shape began forcing itself through the crack in the street, scaled and vast, its head alone wider than the guild hall's front doors. Green light bled from its eye sockets. Nullcrest Leviathan, Roderick said, backing down 2 more stairs. It's early. It shouldn't be able to push through for hours. The gate's been cracking since Kaiser's forced evolution, I said. We ran out of hours. Soot let out a low sound, almost a question, and looked at me. 7 bloodlines, I said. We don't have 7 hours. We have less. Roderick's jaw tightened. Kaiser will give something. He owes Soot his life twice over now. Nix, Bramble go, Talia said. Anyone who owes this dragon a debt, find them. Nix was already gone, a streak of fur and static up the stairs. Bramble turned for the exit at a speed I had never seen from him, shell thudding against the stone walls on the way out. I checked the ledger hovering in my wrist. The counter sat frozen at 0, waiting. Kaiser lowered his head through the stairwell opening, too broad to fit his whole body down the steps. He nosed forward until his mane brushed the top stair. He wants to go too, Roderick said. Stubborn like that. Then point him at every debt Soot's owed, I said. Fastest legs first. Roderick put a hand flat against Kaiser's jaw and said something low, too quiet to carry. The lion turned and bounded off along the surface street, mane catching the daylight. Nina crouched at the stairwell edge, watching the crack widen above them. The wyvern's still circling the block. It won't land this close to the gate, too much pull on its wings. Then someone needs to go up and call it down, I said. That's me, Nina said, and went. Talia stayed at my side, eyes on the empty platform. 6 more, and none of them know to come here. This chamber's never been opened before. There's no bell to ring, no signal. Soot can call them, I said. He called the whole discard ward once with nothing but his voice. Soot lifted his head, throat working, and let out a low, rolling sound I had never heard from him. Felt more than heard, a vibration that ran up through the stone floor and into the soles of my boots. It rolled out through the open stairwell and up into the street above, past the widening crack, past the Leviathan's advancing bulk, out across the city. The chamber held its breath. Comparious Anna's set her medic bag down against the wall, unopened. There was nothing here for bandages. She crouched instead beside the empty platform, fingers hovering just above the gold script, watching the counter like it might twitch on its own. It only moves when something lands on the stone, she said. I checked the edge of it. No seam, no trigger plate, just weight and willingness. Then it's honest, I said. Can't fake either one. Above them, the Leviathan's second shoulder cleared the crack. Green light spilled wider across the ruined pavement, wide enough now that it reached the guild hall's front windows and cracked the glass from the pressure alone. It's not slowing down, Roderick said, watching from the stairs. Whatever that thing feeds on, it's pulling harder the more of it gets through. Then we don't wait for it to finish, I said. We finish first. Roderick checked the readout glowing faint blue on his wrist. 11 minutes on the gate clock when this opened. We're at 8 now. 5 is when it's fully through, full leg, full weight, nothing left holding it back. 3 minutes, Talia said, doing the math out loud like it might make it kinder. 3 minutes to find 7 willing bloodlines in a city this size. They're not strangers, I said. Every one of them already knows Soot's name. That's the whole point of restoring instead of dominating. Debts don't need chasing. They come when called. Soot's tail lashed once against the stone floor, the only sign he was afraid. I put a hand flat against his neck. You called. Now we find out who answers. Above the stairwell, another slab of pavement gave way under the Leviathan's advancing shoulder, and its low, grinding roar rolled down into the chamber loud enough to rattle dust from every seam in the ceiling. Roderick backed the last 2 steps down into the chamber, boots unsteady on the stone. Talia rose from beside the platform, jaw set. Then I'll wait here and log everyone that lands. Someone has to catch them the second they arrive. No time to walk offerings across the chamber twice. Good, I said. Roderick, hold the stairs. If anything but a willing beast tries to come down those steps, it doesn't get past you. Roderick drew the short blade at his hip, more out of habit than intent, and planted himself at the base of the stairwell. Soot pressed both front claws against the platform's edge, head low, waiting on an answer to a call he'd never made before. I kept my hand flat against the cold platform. Then we feed the world before 5, I said. Go. I set the empty cooking platform level and struck the first spark under it. Soot circled the platform twice, then sat at the edge of the light. Wind screamed through the cracked ceiling above us. Dust sifted down from the broken murals onto my shoulders. Somewhere below the floor, the low roar from the gate had already started, faint but steady. My hands were still raw from the last 2 meals I had cooked without rest. Nyx landed first. She dropped a storm tuft from her tail onto the stone, still warm from static. I pressed it between my palms. The tuft broke down into pale mist and folded into a small crystal. Green light pulsed once through my fingers. Beast ledger flared. W.O. World Feast Offerings 1-7. Nyx pressed her nose against my wrist and did not pull away. I set the crystal in the empty bowl at the platform center. Soot leaned closer but still did not touch the bowl. Bramble lumbered through the gap next, a shed crystal wedged in his front claw. He had grown it fresh since the ravine, not torn it loose. I took the crystal from him gently. It purified into the same green glow as Nyx's. I placed it beside the first crystal. The ledger climbed 2-7-7. Bramble folded his legs and lowered his shell, watching the platform instead of me. Kaiser came through the broken archway with Roderick limping behind him. Dried blood still marked the lion's flank from the forced evolution. The lion dipped his mane and offered a single sun-mane thread, torn from his own chest fur. I purified it without looking at Roderick. I set the third crystal down and it clicked softly against the others. The ledger read 3-7. Kaiser exhaled once, slow, and stepped back to guard the entrance instead of standing over Soot. Roderick said nothing. He kept his eyes on the bowl and stayed by the archway. His hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his own chest to stop it. A shadow crossed the shattered roof. The storm wyvern from the ruins dove low and released one glass feather into the wind before climbing back into the storm. I caught it before it hit stone. The feather dissolved into crystal in my hands, thin and clear as ice. I added it to the row. The ledger updated 4-7. The wyvern circled once above the gate, screamed, and vanished into the clouds. Soot watched the sky where it had gone, then looked back at the bowl. The floor shook. The ironback basilisk pushed its head through the ruined wall, the same one Karst's tamers had tried to kill in the gray gate. It set a molted plate chip down at my feet and retreated without threatening Soot. I purified the plate. It came out pale gray, veined with silver. I placed it 5th in line. The ledger climbed 5-7. Talia's scanner beeped once behind me, confirming the material was clean. Bramble nudged the basilisk's retreating tail with his shell, a quiet thanks between 2 beasts nobody had ever paired together. Hob crouched beside the bowl and studied the row of crystals without touching them. The ember bird from the discard ward fluttered in through the gap, the same bird Soot had shielded during the tusk beast attack. It dropped a single flame feather and perched on Bramble's shell, trembling but steady. I turned the feather into crystal. Heat rolled off it even after it cooled. I set it 6th beside the others. The ledger read 6-7. The bird chirped once and did not fly away. Talia counted the crystals under her breath one by one, then stopped and looked at Soot instead of the bowl. 6 crystals sat on the platform, each glowing with its own green plus level mark, spiraling slowly upward like a small crown of light. Soot rose from the edge of the platform and walked to me. He did not wait for a command. He reached back with his jaw and broke off one naturally shedding crown scale from his own shoulder, the same silver-blue plating from his last evolution. He set it in my open hand. The scale was warm and light as paper. I turned it once between my fingers before I began. Soot watched my hands instead of the scale. I purified it last. I placed the 7th crystal at the center of the ring, and the ring closed around it on its own. The ledger locked. World Feast Offering 7-7. Every witness in the chamber went still. Talia lowered her scanner. Hob stopped grinding his mortar. Roderick stared at Kaiser, bowing beside a beast his family had once thrown away. I gathered the 7 crystals into the cooking bowl at the platform center. They spun together into a single pulse of green light, brighter than anything the ledger had shown before. The light climbed the walls and lit the broken murals above us. For a moment, every beast in the chamber turned toward the same point of light instead of toward me. The world feast sat finished in front of Soot. He lowered his head to it but did not eat. The floor cracked again, wider this time, and a low roar rolled up through the broken stone from somewhere far below the city. Talia grabbed the platform's edge to keep her footing. Bob steadied Bramble's shell with one hand and did not look away from Soot. The ledger's countdown blinked once and reset its display. 03,000. 3 hours remained before the gate beneath us tore fully open. I picked up the finished bowl and turned towards Soot. The floor split fully open before I reached him. A shape rose out of the crack, pale and boneless, longer than the chamber. Its head was a flat wedge with no eyes. Its skin ran with cracks of gray light. Nullcrest Leviathan, Talia said. Her voice shook. It's not supposed to be able to reach this high. Its jaw split sideways instead of down. 4 separate plates folding open around a throat lined with gray light. The sound that came out of it wasn't a roar. It was closer to a drone, low enough that I felt it in my teeth before I heard it. The creature's mist rolled across the platform. Every beast near me staggered. Nyx's storm crackled and dimmed. Bramble's shell dimmed from green to gray. Kaiser's sun-mane thread of light guttered like a dying candle. Guards along the observation ring backed away from the rail. One of them shouted for a full chamber evacuation. Nobody moved to leave. Every allied beast in the ring had already planted its feet. It's draining them, Hobbs said. All of them, through the mist. I looked down at the bowl in my hands. Soot looked at it too, then at the Leviathan, then back at the bowl. Eat, I said. Everything you are right now needs this more than the fight does. Soot lowered his head into the bowl and swallowed the world feast in one motion. Nothing happened. The Leviathan's tail swept across the platform edge. Nyx dove under a fallen beam. Bramble curled tight and took the hit on his shell. Kaiser threw himself in front of Talia, sun-mane thread flaring once before it guttered out completely. The tail struck the beam Nyx hid under and drove it down into the stone. Bramble's shell scraped a long white line across the floor before it stopped moving. Every ward creature I had fed, healed, or rescued across 3 days was now standing between the Leviathan and the rest of the city, and every one of them was losing ground. Kaiser. Roderick's voice cracked across the chamber. He was already moving, already at his brother's side, dragging him back from the edge. Soot's body seized. Light broke out of his scales in 7 separate points, one for each crystal he had swallowed. The points spread and joined into a single sheet of white gold fire that climbed his spine and rolled down his sides. The ledger flared to life above him. RANK SSW SSS+. The scanner symbol spun once, then froze, then flashed an error and reset itself. It tried again. It froze a second time. It can't read past SSS, Hobbs said, staring at the frozen display. There's no slot for what it's seeing. The light around Soot didn't stop climbing. His frame lengthened. Wings I had never seen fully spread broke free of his shoulders, each one edged in silver blue. His scales shifted from ember orange to white gold, streaked through with veins of the same silver blue that ran along his wings. A crown of pale spines rose along his skull, 7 points, one for each mark. The Leviathan's next strike hit a wall of light instead of stone. Soot had grown too large to stand fully upright in the chamber. His new bulk cracked the ceiling above the platform. He did not seem to notice. Dust rained down from the broken murals. Talia grabbed Hobbs' sleeve and pulled him back a full step. Neither of them took their eyes off the light still climbing Soot's frame. The rejected lizard I had carried out of the discard ward in one hand was gone. Something the ward had never held before stood in his place. The scanner tried a third time. It printed a single line and held it steady. ASSS+. Talia read it out loud twice before anyone else moved. SSS+, she said. It exists. It printed. The ledger's second field updated beneath the rank. Ask combat 700,000 free million plus. Bob dropped his mortar. It shattered on the stone and he didn't look at it. The third field changed next. Bloodline 94%, 100%. Roderick, still braced under his brother's weight, went still enough that I could hear him breathe from across the platform. The fourth field locked last. CRON marks 6777. Every mark Soot had earned lit at once along his new spine, 7 separate points of steady light instead of scattered scars. The world mark sat brightest among them, a pale crown-shaped scar just behind his skull. I looked at the wing mark scar, the breath mark scar, the fang mark scar, all the way back to the first one, and none of them had ever looked small before this moment. Now they looked like the first 7 steps of something that had only just started climbing. The Leviathan reared back from the light and struck again, faster this time, aiming for the ring of allied beasts instead of Soot directly. Nyx took the hit meant for Bramble and went down hard against the platform stone. He didn't get up. Talia was already crawling toward him across the shaking floor when the dome of light reached her too. Soot's new wings snapped open fully. A dome of white gold light spread out from his chest and rolled over every beast in the chamber at once. Nyx's storm crackled back to full brightness. Bramble's shell shifted from gray back to deep green. Kaiser's sun main thread reignited. Thin at first, then steady. World domain, Talia said, reading the ledger's new line. It's restoring drained mana across the whole field, not just healing him. The mist thinned wherever the dome's light touched it. The Leviathan's cracks of gray light dimmed as the dome pushed against them. Now, I said. Nyx launched a bolt of restored storm current straight into the Leviathan's flank. Bramble rammed his renewed shell into one of its trailing limbs and pinned it against the broken stone. Kaiser's sun main thread wrapped around the creature's throat and held. Soot flew straight at the widening rupture in the floor and hit it with everything the World Feast had given him. The Leviathan's head snapped back toward the gate, dragged by its own mass and the pull of the closing tier. It thrashed once against the frame of broken stone. Soot didn't strike it again. He landed in front of the rupture instead and pressed both clawed hands against the widening crack. 7 points of light rose off his new spine, one from each mark, and arranged themselves in a ring around the tier in the floor. The symbol sank into the stone. The rupture's edges stopped spreading. The gray light bleeding out of it dimmed, flickered, and thinned to nothing. Roderick set Kaiser down carefully against the wall and stood up straight, watching the 7 symbols cool from white to gray on the stone. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on his brother's chest until he saw it rise. Talia knelt beside Nyx and pressed a hand to his side. His storm current flickered under her palm. Steady now. Weak, but steady. He's breathing, she said, mostly to herself. He's breathing. Bramble dragged himself upright on 3 legs and pressed his cracked shell against Nyx's side, as if his own weight could hold the smaller creature together. Hob crouched over his broken mortar, picked up the largest shard, and set it down again without saying anything. His hands were shaking too hard to hold it. I looked up at the countdown display bolted above the observation ring. The 7-hour buffer we had bought ourselves at the last offering had burned down through every second of the fight. 0 SA8. 8 seconds left on a 72-hour clock, and the gate was sealed. Soot folded his new wings against his back and turned to look at me, silver blue veins still glowing faint along white gold scales, the 7 marks steady on his spine. I didn't say anything. There wasn't a word that fit what he'd become, and the number on the wall had already said it for me. The observation ring speaker crackled to life. I planted my boot on the cracked platform stone as the speaker's static cleared. Soot climbed onto my shoulder and hissed at the closing rupture. Trial system is live, a voice said from the observation ring. This defense counts as your practical examination. I didn't ask who authorized it. I raised my hand toward the gate and Soot's flame answered. Steam rolled off the broken stone. The Leviathan's tail thrashed once against the gate frame and went still. So its fire held the rupture shut, thin and steady, a wall no bigger than a doorway. The last surge of Leviathan mist thinned and died. The number on my wristband dropped to 005. The platform locked. License permanent. Crown marks 77. ASSS plus, SSS plus. Combat 3,000,000 plus. The crowd behind the barrier went silent, then loud. Talia pressed both hands to her mouth. Permanent, she said. They can't touch that. Hob pushed through beside her, apron still dusted with flour from the sanctuary kitchen. He read the board twice before he spoke. SSS plus, he said. I fed that lizard scraps off my cutting board. He shook his head like the number didn't fit in it. Nyx darted along the barrier rail, chittering at the drop in tension. Sam stayed low near the gatepost, shell scraped from the fight, watching the platform without moving. His nose lifted once toward Soot, then settled, satisfied the danger had passed. A city officer walked past me toward the guild box. 2 more followed with a folder of printed pages. Talia grabbed Hob's sleeve and pointed. That's the frog unit, she said, not the normal desk. Hob watched the officers set the folder down. They don't send 3 for a scanner glitch, he said. He wiped his hands on his apron like he wanted them clean for whatever came next. Karst stood and pointed at me. That result is a scanner error. It's not, Roderick said. He set a data slate on the officer's table. I pulled the breeding logs myself. Dates, batch numbers, F-rank stamps he applied after the fact. The city cameras have the rest. The officer read the slate once and closed it. Karst's license was suspended on the spot, breeding rights revoked. Karst didn't answer. They walked him out through the side gate. 2 guild clerks followed with sealed record boxes, faces blank, saying nothing to anyone. Nick stopped chittering and watched Karst go, head tilted, ears flat. Bramble didn't move from the gate post, but his shell scraped against the stone when Karst passed, a low grinding sound that made 2 clerks flinch. Nix darted a few feet after the group, then stopped at the barrier line, chittering low, and came back to Bramble's side instead of following further. Roderick turned to me. His jaw was tight. "I'm done being an heir," he said. "The board's stripping the title anyway. I asked for it first." He looked past me at Kaiser, who was pacing the far fence, mane matted with soot and blood. "He needs a handler who isn't me. I'm starting that today." I nodded. He didn't wait for more from me. He walked to Kaiser's fence. Talia watched him go. "A sanctuary," she said, like she was trying the word out. "Roderick Karst, running a sanctuary." "Not a Karst sanctuary," Hobbs said. "Just his." He nodded once, like that settled it for him. Kaiser stopped pacing when Roderick reached the fence. The lion lowered his head over the rail and let Roderick press a palm flat against his beak. Neither of them made a sound. Nina came through the gap in the crowd. She stopped 2 steps away, not closer. "I'm sorry," she said. "For the ward, for what I said about soot, I'm not asking you to fix it." Her hand stayed at her sides. She glanced at the board, then back at me, like the numbers on it made the apology harder to say, not easier. I looked at her for a moment before I answered. The board above us still held the numbers, permanent and lit. "I heard you," I said. "That's enough for today." She didn't smile. She didn't ask for more than that either. She nodded once and stepped back into the crowd. I didn't follow her. She found a spot near the barrier and watched the rest of it from there, arms crossed, saying nothing else. Suit didn't look at her either. He kept his eyes on the board. The public testing board flickered and reset itself. The second line appeared under the ledger readout, smaller, archived. Original combat, 8. See you aren't combat, 3 million porse. Talia read it out loud without meaning to. 8, she said. They kept the 8. They should, I said. It's still true. Soot climbed down my arm and sat on the platform edge, tail curled, watching the number hold steady on the board. The countdown on my wristband stayed dark at W0,000. Above the gate, a new number replaced it, a trial ID, permanent, filed. Steam rose off the new soup pots in the Evolution kitchen. I carried a bowl across the courtyard and set it on the flat stone by the fountain. Months had passed since the gate closed for good. The empty lot Soot had once eyed through the barrier hadn't stayed empty. The discard ward wasn't a discard ward anymore. A hand-painted sign over the gate read SEC Dawn, Sanctuary and Evolution. Seacon. The paint was still fresh enough to smell. Talia crossed the yard with a clipboard, checking a line of cages that weren't locked. "New intake stable," she said. "No fever, no scarring." She marked the sheet and moved on without waiting for a reply. She'd stopped waiting for permission months ago. This place ran on her clipboard now, not on a guild ledger. Bob stood at a long table, slicing feed roots into even strips. 3 kids in sanctuary aprons copied his cuts, slower, less sure. "Even pieces," he told them. "A bad cut wastes a good bowl." He didn't look up from his knife. He'd been saying the same line every morning since the kitchen opened, and none of them had gotten tired of hearing it yet. Nick streaked along the fence line, chittering at a crate of new arrivals stacked by the gate. Bramble lay across the entrance path, shell warm in the sun, blocking nothing, just resting where the light landed. New creatures stepped around him without fear. Nobody here taught them to be afraid of a shell in the doorway. Soot stretched out on the courtyard wall in his final form, wings folded, eyes half shut. He didn't lift his head when I walked past. He didn't need to anymore. 3 years back, he'd tracked every footstep in the ward like a threat. Now he slept through them. A rustle came from the low hedge near the fountain. Something small pushed through the leaves. It had matted fur, a torn ear, and ribs I could count from 10 feet away. It moved low to the ground, the way things move when they've learned that standing tall gets you noticed. It stopped at the edge of the stone and stared at the bowl. I crouched down slow and didn't reach for it. "Nobody's going to grab you here," I said. I kept my hands flat on my knees, palms up, the way Talia taught every new handler in the sanctuary. The beast ledger opened over the bowl, thin and quiet, nothing like the boards from the gate. No countdown, no crowd, just 2 lines hanging in the air above the stone. Bloodline 1%. Any X'd meal available. Talia glanced over from the cages but didn't move closer. Bob kept slicing roots, one ear turned toward the fountain, his knife never slowing. Nix went still on the fence rail, watching without a sound for the first time all morning. I set the bowl down flat and slid it an inch closer, then pulled my hand back and waited. I'd done this exact thing once before, years ago, with a lizard that had a bloodline nobody bothered to scan twice. The The creature's nose twitched. It took one step onto the stone, then another, ears low, tail flat against the ground. It lowered its head to the bowl and ate. Soot opened one eye from the wall and watched it, tail curling once, and said nothing at all. He didn't need to. He remembered what that first bowl felt like better than anyone left in this yard. I stayed crouched beside the fountain, watching the small thing eat, the ledger's two thin lines still glowing over the bowl. Somewhere behind me, Hobbs' knife kept tapping the table, steady, unhurried, and the kids kept slicing roots into even strips. I didn't move until the bowl was empty, and even then I didn't rush it. There was no clock running on this one.